The water holds you. Not with force, not with pressure, just with the soft and total certainty of something that has always been here, that does not need your permission to exist, that carries you the way the dark carries stars, without effort, without intention, with a kind of indifference that is itself a comfort. You are suspended. The surface is somewhere above you, a faint silver shimmer that does not press upon you, does not demand you return. And below, the water descends into gradients of blue, then green, then a darkness so complete it is not frightening but simply final. The way sleep itself is final, the way breathing out is final before the next breath arrives without your asking. This is the Cretaceous Sea. You do not need to know that name to be here. Nothing here knows that name. The Mosasaur threading the warm shallows to your left has no language for what it is. The long, slow schools of fish, parting and rejoining in the middle distance, carry no knowledge of their own age. The ammonite drifting past your shoulder, its shell a perfect spiral of rust and cream, has been building that spiral for longer than you have been alive, and it does not know that either. Everything here simply is. Everything here simply moves and breathes and sinks and rises and feeds and waits and moves again. 80 million years ago, nothing had a name. And that is perhaps the most restful thing you have ever heard. The water is warm near the surface. You feel it like an embrace. The temperature of something living, something that breathes. A current moves across your skin, gentle and lateral, carrying the faint mineral scent of ancient sediment, of shell and salt, and the slow chemistry of a world still arranging itself. You do not swim. You do not need to. You simply let the water make its decisions about where you go, and you go there, and it is enough. Close your eyes a little, or perhaps they are already closing. The light through the surface is soft and shifting, the colour of old honey, and it moves with the rhythm of something that has no rhythm at all. Organic, inconstant, the most natural pattern in the world, which is the pattern of no pattern. You breathe. The water breathes with you. Somewhere far below, something ancient and enormous moves with the slow patience of everything that has ever had enough time. You are early. You are impossibly early. You're so early that the word early has no meaning here, because there is no late to measure against it, no future pressing at your back, no calendar turning its pages in some distant century. There is only now. There is only the water. There is only the warm and gentle dark beginning to rise through the blue. Let it come. There are no sounds here that you have a name for. Or rather, there are sounds, and you have words, wave, current, depth. But those words were made for a world with edges, a world with names attached to things, a world in which the naming preceded the understanding. Here the understanding is everything, and the naming is nothing, because there is no one to do the naming, and the things themselves have no need of names, and would not be changed by having them. The water moves through the water, the light moves through the light. The warm Cretaceous sea holds itself together by chemistry and temperature, and the slow physics of fluid dynamics, and none of this is different for being unnamed. You have arrived here without knowing quite how you arrived. That is appropriate. Arrivals in the Cretaceous do not have explanations. You are here because here exists, and because existing is what it does, and because the sea is what it is and has always been, and because the water under you is the same water that is under everything in this sea, connected to all of it, indifferent to boundaries, holding the same salt and the same warmth it holds everywhere, holding you with the same ease and the same complete lack of special consideration it extends to the ammonites, and the mosasaurs, and the plankton, and the particulate matter of the forming chalk. You do not need to do anything with this. You do not need to make it mean something, or remember it correctly, or find the lesson in it. The Cretaceous sea does not have lessons. It has only the fact of itself, the sustained undeniable fact of warm water and warm air, and the patient going about its business of 80 million years of life in the making. And the fact is enough. And the fact is what you are floating in, and the floating is easy, and the easy is the point. Let yourself be very still now. Let the first sensation of the water take over from whatever sensation you brought with you into this. The water is warmer than you expected and cooler than the air above it, and exactly the right temperature to stop being a temperature and start being a condition, to stop being something you are noticing and start being something you are simply in, the way you are simply in the afternoon without noticing the afternoon, except when you are brought back to it by some particular quality of it. You are brought back to it by the light. The light here is a particular kind of light, tropical, overhead, filtered by water, made into columns rather than a sheet, arriving at you from multiple angles simultaneously as it reflects off the particulate in the water and off the gentle undulations of the surface above and below. It is a light that moves constantly without moving fast. It is a light that is alive in the sense that all light in moving water is alive, which is the sense in which alive means responsive to every small change in the medium it travels through, a record of the water's state at every moment and every position, a continuous real-time map of the sea's surface written in shifts of illumination on everything the light touches. You're touched by the light. You're touching the water is touching everything. You breathe out, and the breath leaves you in a stream of bubbles that rise through the warm water with their own small buoyancy, finding the surface, crossing the boundary, becoming air again. You breathe in. The process continues. It does not require your management. It has never required your management. It is, if you will permit the word, automatic. The body, knowing what the body has always known, which is how to keep going, which is all it has ever needed to know. The water temperature registers somewhere between bath warm and the warmth of a particularly good afternoon on a particular shore you may have visited at some point in your life, on a day when the conditions were exactly right, and the water was exactly the right temperature, and the sun was at exactly the right angle, and everything conspired to produce a quality of ease that you have been trying, intermittently, to recreate ever since. The Cretaceous Sea is that temperature. The Cretaceous Sea is that ease. It has been that ease for longer than anything currently alive can claim to have experienced, and it will continue to be that ease for the duration of your time here, which is as long as you wish it to be. The sky above you through the water is a wavering bright thing, the surface acting as a lens that bends the sky into motion, makes it liquid, makes the distinction between above and below less certain than it usually is. You are between the sky and the deep, suspended in the warm layer, and the warm layer holds you with a buoyancy that has nothing to do with your effort, and everything to do with the simple physics of a body less dense than the salt water it is in. You are held. You did not ask to be held, and you do not need to ask. The holding is automatic. The holding is the nature of salt water, and the nature of your body in salt water, and the nature of this particular sea in this particular afternoon. Begin here. Begin in this warmth, in this light, in this suspension between sky and depth. There is nowhere else to be and no reason to be anywhere else, and the Cretaceous Sea is patient and warm, and it will be here for as long as you are here, and you can stay as long as you wish. The afternoon has barely begun. The afternoon has been going on for 80 million years. There is no contradiction in both of those things being true. If you enjoy listening to sleepy prehistoric stories like this, subscribe. I post stories like this weekly. You're drifting through the Western Interior Seaway. That is what the geologists of a much later century will call it, when they find the limestone and chalk it left behind pressed into the plains of what will become Kansas and South Dakota and Texas. Formations pale and silent as old paper, carrying within them the compressed remains of everything that lived in this water and fell slowly to its floor. But none of that has happened yet. The naming has not happened. The finding has not happened. The dying, for most of what swims around you now, has not happened either. It is perhaps 80 million years before the present moment, give or take a few million years in either direction, which is a margin of error so vast it contains entire civilizations, contains, in fact, the entire span of human existence several thousand times over. Here, a million years is an ordinary thing. A million years is Tuesday. The sea does not mark the passage of a million years in any way you would recognize. It simply continues. It warms a little, cools a little, deepens in one place, shallows in another. The chemistry of the water shifts by imperceptible degrees. New species appear in the fossil record and old ones quietly cease to appear. And the sea continues. You are floating in the middle portion of the seaway, far from either shore. The water here is perhaps 200 meters deep. Not the abyssal depths of the open ocean, but deep enough that the floor is hidden from you, deep enough that the creatures of the benthos, the bottom dwellers, live their entire lives in a world you cannot see from where you are. The surface light reaches down perhaps 30 meters before the blue begins to darken, and below that is a world of bioluminescent faint glimmers and slow cold currents that have not seen the sun in a very long time. The surface, though, the surface where you drift, is alive with light. The sun is younger here, not by much in cosmic terms, but younger nonetheless, and it seems to burn with a slightly different quality of warmth, something a little more unfiltered, a little more direct. The sky above is not unfamiliar. It is blue. It holds clouds in the shapes clouds have always held. That particular language of water vapour that exists independently of anything that looks up at it and sees. The clouds do not care that there is no word for them. They simply drift. You drift beneath them. All around you life proceeds. This is what you must understand about the Cretaceous sea, the thing that might take your breath away if you let it. It is not sparse, it is not empty, it is not waiting to become something. It is already the fullest version of itself, a riot of evolutionary experiments so dense and various that no catalogue made in any later century will fully contain it. The water you float in carries billions of microscopic organisms, coccolithophores, tiny single-celled algae armoured in calcium carbonate plates so small and so numerous that when they die and sink, they will eventually form the white cliffs of what will be called England, and the chalk downs of what will be called France, and the pale bluffs of Kansas. They are dying now, all around you, by the billions, sinking in their billions toward the floor, and as they go they carry with them a record of this moment, the temperature, the chemistry, the angle of the sun, locked in their calcium like a letter placed carefully in a very slow postal system, addressed to no one, delivered in 80 million years. You breathe slowly. The water laps at your shoulders. A fish circles once and moves on, utterly unimpressed. Everything here is utterly unimpressed. You are a novel presence in an ancient place, and the ancient place does not particularly notice, and that, the not noticing, is its own form of welcome. Rest here a moment. You have arrived at the right time. Or rather, you have arrived at a time that has no wrong in it, because it predates the concept of wrong by such an enormous margin that the concept cannot even be smelled on the wind. The sea holds you. The sea has been holding things for longer than you can imagine. It is very good at it. Let it hold you too. The seaway has been here for longer than you can hold comfortably in your mind as a single thought. To say 20 million years is to say a number, and numbers at this scale become abstract, become not quite real in the way that any number too large for direct experience becomes not quite real. The way to hold it is not in the number but in the accumulation. Every summer of every year of those 20 million years the sea was here. Every winter, every storm, every calm, every day when the surface was exactly like this and every day when it was different. And the accumulated weight of all those days is what produced the sea you are floating in, which is not a new sea but a mature one. A sea that has settled into its patterns and knows its floor and has been running the same circulation and the same food chain and the same slow accumulation of chalk on its floor for so long that the chalk itself is kilometres thick in some places. This is the middle of a long story. You have arrived in the middle, not the beginning, not the end. The beginning was elsewhere and earlier, when the continent that will become North America split from the continent that is slowly becoming what you know as the rest of the world, and the split-opened basins that filled with water, and the water connected to the world ocean, and the shallow sea spread across the low interior of the continent like the filling of a shallow bowl. That is the beginning, or one beginning, and the beginning was not this. The beginning was shallower, warmer even than this, smaller, without the full development of all the species you will encounter today. And the end is also elsewhere and later. The end is the slow regression of the sea as the land rises in the west, the Rocky Mountains completing their uplift and tilting the continent slightly, draining the shallow interior seas eastward and westward, until the seaway is two separate seas, and then two separate systems of rivers and eventually dry land. But that is later. That is beyond the horizon of this afternoon, in a way that the afternoon cannot perceive. You are in the flourishing middle. You are in the period of maximum development, maximum diversity, maximum abundance. This is the sea at its best, or one of its bests, and the quality of the afternoon you're about to experience is the quality of a mature and healthy ecosystem, that has been doing this for a very long time and is very good at it. The plankton are in the water. The ammonites are in the water. The mosasaurs and the plesiosaurs and the sea turtles and the sharks are in the water. The pteranodons are above the water. The reef is at the margin of the water. The dinosaurs are behind the reef, on the shore, in the forest. Everything is in its place and has been in its place, and will remain in its place for longer than seems possible. You are welcome here. There is no one to welcome you, which means that the welcome is structural rather than social, built into the nature of the place rather than offered by any of its inhabitants. The water is the welcome. The warmth is the welcome. The light is the welcome. The sea does not know you are here and is not glad to have you and will not miss you when you go. And all of that is fine. All of that is the right relationship to a place this old and this indifferent and this beautiful. And the rightness of it is itself a kind of welcome. The welcome that consists not in being recognized but in being included, not in being known but in being present. The afternoon is beginning its first hour. The sun is past its highest point and the shadows are just beginning to lengthen on the water, which means that the light has that particular quality that it achieves in the hour afternoon. Warm, direct, still powerful, but already beginning the long lean toward the amber of the late afternoon. The surface of the sea is brilliant in this light. Not uncomfortably brilliant. There is no glare, no intensity that forces you to look away, but the particular liquid brilliance of sunlit tropical water, a brightness that is alive and in motion, and that makes everything in it visible, every movement, every shadow, every cloud of plankton and school of fish in the upper layer. You are going to spend the whole afternoon here, and then the evening, and then the night. The night will be long in the way that all nights in warm seas are long. Not cold, not hostile, not the northern dark of freezing water and absent sun, but warm dark, the darkness of a sky still warm from the day above, a sea still warm from the afternoon. The stars very bright in the clear atmosphere of a world not yet complicated by industrial history. The night will give you things the afternoon cannot. Bioluminescence, silence, the deep water sounds, the particular quality of floating in the dark with no urgency and no schedule, and nothing required except the continuation of breath. But that is later. For now, afternoon. For now, the warm surface, the plankton bloom, the ammonites in the shallows of the current, the pteranodons beginning to build their thermal overhead, the mosasaur somewhere in the middle water going about its unhurried business. For now, begin. The skin of the sea is a place of its own. Not quite water, not quite air, but the meeting of the two, a membrane so thin it has no real thickness at all, and yet within that sliver of interface, a whole community of organisms has arranged itself with the unhurried confidence of things that have been doing this for a very long time. You are floating at this membrane now, your face tilted toward the sky, and the water beneath you is so gently warm that the boundary between your body and the sea has become difficult to locate precisely. You could not say, if asked, exactly where you end and the water begins. That question does not seem important here. It seems, in fact, like a question that was never worth asking, a question that belongs to a more anxious world than this one. The surface light dances. You know this word, dances, and it is the right word, or at least the closest available word, because what the light does here has the quality of movement without intention, of pattern without plan. Each small wave refracts the sun into a slightly different angle, and those refractions travel down through the water in long shifting columns of gold and pale green, illuminating nothing in particular, illuminating everything in passing, the way a thought sometimes illuminates something you did not know you were thinking about until the light passed through it and moved on. The light is not searching for anything. It is simply falling, simply passing through the water on its way somewhere else, and in the passing it makes the water visible, and the water in its visibility is extraordinary. Directly beneath you, in the upper metre or two of the water column, the plankton bloom. That word, bloom, is one of the best words for what this is, because it captures the vegetable patience of it, the way it happens not in an event but in a season, not with noise but with accumulation. The coccolithophores you drifted past in your arrival are here in their billions, each one a sphere of calcium plates smaller than a grain of fine sand, each one catching a fragment of sunlight and converting it into the slow chemistry of life. They are the foundation, not in any metaphorical sense, but in the most literal possible sense. Everything that eats in this sea eats something that has eaten them, or something that has eaten something that has eaten them, and they in turn eat only light. They are the first step in a chain that begins in the sun and ends in the dark sediment of the floor. And right now, floating at the surface, you're inside the first step. You're inside the beginning of things. The water around you glitters faintly with it. Not a visible sparkle, nothing so dramatic, but a quality of the light refracted back up through the uppermost layers that is slightly different from ordinary open water, slightly richer, slightly more alive in the way that good bread is more alive than flour. You cannot name the difference, you simply feel it. The water here has a texture of abundance, a density of possibility, a quality of being full in the way that a room is full when the people in it are content. Small fish move through this layer with a kind of purposeful grazing, opening their mouths to the water and closing them and opening them again, their gill rakers sifting the microscopic from the slightly less microscopic, building themselves from light at one remove. They are silver-sided and blue-backed, the colour of camouflage in a world where above you there is a sky, and below you there is a darker world, and the combination of those two colours makes you invisible to both, to the predator looking up from below who sees sky, and to the predator looking down from above who sees sea. This is a solution. Not a thought-out solution, not a designed solution, but a solution arrived at through the ancient and patient mathematics of survival. The fish that were less well-coloured left fewer fish behind them. The fish that were well-coloured are these fish, now, here, grazing the plankton in the warm layer of the Cretaceous surface, utterly unaware that they are a solution to anything at all. You watch them with a great and comfortable drowsiness. There is something about watching animals that have no anxiety, and these fish, in this moment, in this small space of ordinary feeding, are without anxiety, that softens the watcher. Their movement has a rhythm to it. Open, close, turn, open, close. The school tightens and loosens as if breathing, the individual fish making decisions that are not quite individual decisions, responding to their neighbours the way water responds to current, with an immediacy that has no gap between stimulus and response. There is no deliberation. There is no gap in which worry could live. There is only the opening of the mouth and the water passing through, and then the opening of the mouth again, and the water passing through again, and the fish's body growing incrementally larger from the accumulated passage of water and the organisms it contained. You could watch this for a very long time. You are, in fact, watching it for a very long time, though time in this sea does not declare itself in the way that time elsewhere does. There is no clock here. There is no sense of hours accumulating towards something, no awareness of a schedule to be kept, no deadline pressing at the edge of the afternoon. There is only the light moving through the water, and the fish moving through the light, and the plankton moving through both, and all of it together producing this particular quality of the Cretaceous afternoon that is utterly without urgency. Farther out, perhaps 20 meters from you, the surface breaks briefly. Something has come up, not dramatically, not the way you might imagine a great prehistoric creature breaching, but with the gentle, deliberate rise of an animal that needs air and has risen to take it, as it has risen 1,000 times before today, and will rise 1,000 more. A plesiosaur, small by the standards of this sea, perhaps 4 meters from the tip of its blunt snout to the trailing edge of its hind flippers. Its neck curves upward, and its nostrils flare briefly at the surface. 1 breath, 2, the sound of it like a low, tired sigh, the exhalation carrying the warm chemical signature of large lungs that have been working, and then it slides back under with almost no disturbance, a long oval body rotating around its own centre with the smoothness of something that belongs here completely, that has never had reason to be anywhere else. The ripple from its descent reaches you in a few seconds. A small wave, a gentle rocking, the water adjusting itself around the memory of its passage. You are rocked by it. There is a generosity in being rocked by the passage of another animal through the water, a kind of unintended gift. The plesiosaur went about its business with no awareness of you, with no intention toward you, and yet its movement in the water produced a movement that reached you and moved you, and in that reaching and moving there is a connection of a sort, a transmission of energy from one body to another through the medium of the sea acting as it always acts, carrying everything, transmitting everything, the medium through which all the intentions and non-intentions of all the animals in it reach each other and produce, in aggregate, the living sea. The sun is warm on your face, the water is warm at your sides. Below you, the plankton continue their patient conversion of light into life, and the fish continue their patient conversion of plankton into fish. And somewhere under the surface, your plesiosaur continues its patient conversion of fish into plesiosaur, and the whole pyramid of it holds together the way it has always held together, through nothing more complicated than the fact of appetite and the fact of abundance. And both of those facts have been true in this sea for so long that they are not facts anymore, but simply the nature of things. You breathe, the water breathes. The Cretaceous afternoon advances toward its evening with no particular hurry and no awareness of being watched. The warmth on your skin deepens slightly as the afternoon reaches its peak. This is the warmest part of the warmest sea in a warm world. The Cretaceous climate is several degrees warmer than the global average of any era you might be familiar with. The poles largely ice-free. The temperature distributed across the planet with an evenness that produces long growing seasons and warm, shallow seas, and the particular abundance that follows from both. This sea is the beneficiary of all of that warmth, receiving it from the sun, storing it in the water's thermal mass, radiating it upward into the air above and downward into the water below, in a constant exchange that has been running for millions of years and will run for millions more. You are floating inside the warmth. You are, in some sense, the warmth, because the warmth has entered you through your skin and your breathing, and there is no longer a precise distinction between the temperature of the sea and the temperature of your body. They have reached an accommodation. The accommodation is called comfort. Let your eyes grow heavy. The light is very gentle now, the afternoon beginning its long lean toward evening. The sun's angle shifting from overhead toward the western horizon, in a movement too slow to track but visible in the changing quality of the shadows on the water, the way the light comes at you from slightly to the side rather than from directly above. The fish below you are still moving, still grazing, their silver sides catching the sun in small quiet flashes that are almost like the memory of something, almost like the feeling of falling asleep, that particular quality of half-noticed light that comes at the edge of consciousness and does not demand anything of you except that you follow it down. A small jellyfish pulses past you at the level of your shoulders, trailing its tentacles in the water like a thought trailing its associations, barely there and yet entirely present in the way that very transparent things are entirely present. You are aware of it not through substance but through distortion, through the slight bending of the light that passes through it, through the particular quality of its movement which is not swimming but pulsing, the same motion repeated with the same interval between each repetition, a living metronome set to a tempo that has nothing to do with urgency and everything to do with the simple mechanics of jetting water backward and being pushed forward by the consequence. Its bell opens, its bell closes. The water moves through it and it moves through the water, and the exchange is so fundamental, so completely without friction, that it is impossible to say whether the jellyfish is moving through the world or the world is moving through the jellyfish. Perhaps both, perhaps neither. Perhaps there is a third answer to that question that the Cretaceous Sea has arrived at, and that requires different language than you currently have available. You watch the jellyfish until it descends below the level at which you can see it, the water closing over its passage the way sleep closes over the details of the day. The light continues its movement across the surface. You have been watching it for some time now, long enough that you have stopped registering it as spectacle and begun receiving it as condition, the way you stop noticing a piece of music after a while and simply exist inside it. The light is no longer something happening to the water. It is simply what the water is, in the same way that warmth is simply what this afternoon is, inseparable from its context, woven into the texture of everything. To notice the light, you would have to step outside of it, and there is nowhere outside of it to stand. Occasionally a larger ripple moves through the surface layer, originating from somewhere beyond the range of your easy vision. Another animal breaking the surface 100 meters away, or a slight shift in the wind's direction producing a temporary chop that organizes itself into a set of low rollers, each one a gentle elevation and depression, a hills and valleys of water so mild that you barely rise and fall through it, barely register the difference between the crest and the trough. The swells are slower than you would expect their period, the time between one crest and the next, measured in many seconds rather than in moments, a rhythm so slow it is barely rhythm, barely pattern, more like the concept of pattern than pattern itself. You rise very gently. You fall very gently. The sea breathes you the way lungs breathe air, with the deep and automatic rhythm of something that does not need to think about the act. The afternoon continues. The plankton continue their patient work in the euphotic zone, the layer of water that light penetrates deeply enough to power photosynthesis, building themselves from dissolved carbon and sunlight in a process that requires no intention and no understanding and no knowledge of what it is doing or why. They simply grow where the conditions allow growth, and here the conditions allow a great deal of growth. Warm water, abundant nutrients upwelling from below, year-round sunlight at tropical latitudes that varies only in angle, and never approaches the long winter darkness that would limit production at higher latitudes. This sea, in this season, is about as productive as a sea can be, and the productivity expresses itself in the slight opacity of the surface water, the richness of it, the sense that every cubic centimetre of the upper ocean is fully occupied, fully engaged in the business of converting light and dissolved molecules into tissue and shell. You are floating in the factory of the food chain. The foundation of everything is happening all around you, invisibly and continuously, and its invisibility does not make it less real or less important. The invisibility of foundations is one of the consistent features of foundations. They work below the level of the visible, in the substrate in the bedrock, and the visible world that rests upon them is very often unaware of them until they shift. Here, in the Cretaceous afternoon, the foundations are not shifting. They are exactly what they have always been and what they will continue to be for millions of years to come. The coccolithophores will build their calcium plates and die and fall and become chalk, and the fish will graze the plankton and be grazed in turn by larger fish, and the larger fish will be taken by things still larger, and the whole pyramid will stand, as it has always stood, on the patient invisible work of the smallest things, on light falling through water onto organisms that turn it into life. Your eyes are growing heavy with it. Not with the effort of watching, there is no effort in this watching, but with the particular heaviness that comes from being entirely at rest in the presence of something that does not require anything of you. The afternoon asks nothing, the sea asks nothing, the plankton asks nothing, the silver fish below you ask nothing. You're a visitor here with no obligations, no tasks, no place you need to reach by any particular time, and the absence of all that requirement is settling over you like warm water, like the water itself, like the very specific comfort of floating without needing to swim. Follow it down, the water will hold you. The water has always held everything. Rest here a little while. The afternoon has hours in it yet, and none of those hours require anything of you, and the water is exactly the right temperature, and the light is exactly the right quality, and the fish are moving in exactly the right way, and there is nothing to adjust and nothing to improve and nothing to attend to except the bare fact of being here in the warm Cretaceous sea, held by salt water that has been holding things since the first moment that anything in this world needed holding. Something large is moving below you. You feel it before you see it, a change in the water, a very slight increase in pressure against the soles of your feet, a deepening of the current as something displaces a great volume of water in its passage. You look down through the clear surface layer, and at first there is nothing, only the familiar green-blue gradient of depth, the light columns bending and scattering as they descend, the plankton layer thinning as the depth increases, and then, just at the edge of visibility, just where the light gives out and the water shades into the colour of deep shadow, there is movement. It is very large. Even at that depth, even at the edge of your vision, the shape is unmistakable. The long body, the four powerful flippers, the heavy tapering tail, the thick neck, and the massive head. A mosasaur, perhaps 12 metres from its blunt snout to the end of its compressed tail, moving through the middle water with the unhurried efficiency of an animal that has no predators, that knows itself to be the largest thing in any part of this sea it chooses to occupy, that has no reason to hurry and every reason to be calm. It is calm. You can see its calmness in the quality of its movement, in the slow alternating beat of its flippers that propels it forward without effort, in the way its head does not swivel or search but simply faces forward, trusting its other senses, its chemical receptors, its pressure-sensitive lateral line, its deep biological awareness of everything moving in the water around it, to provide the information its eyes cannot. You hold very still. Not because you are afraid, there is no fear in this floating, or if there is something that resembles fear, it is a very old and clean kind of fear, the kind that sharpens the senses without narrowing the mind, the kind that makes the world momentarily more real rather than less, but because stillness seems like the right response to the presence of something this complete, this finished, this fully itself. The mosasaur is not a partial thing or an aspiration or a work in progress. It arrived at its current form through a process of trial and refinement that makes your longest designs look hasty. It is the result of selection operating on every ancestor it ever had, and every ancestor was slightly better at being this thing than the one before it, and the accumulated improvement of all those generations has produced this, 12 meters of perfectly functional predator moving through the warm water of the Cretaceous Sea with the quiet confidence of ownership. You watch it from above. It does not look up. Why would it look up? Its food does not come from above. Its food comes from the middle water, from the schools of large fish, and the smaller reptiles and whatever else is available, and suitably sized, and its food is currently below it and to the side, and the surface is not interesting to the mosasaur in this particular moment. You are safe in your float. You are a warm shape on the surface in a world that contains nothing adapted to taking warm shapes from the surface. The mosasaur is adapted for the middle water, for pursuit through the three-dimensional space of the sea, and the surface is simply the ceiling of its world, a boundary it crosses when it needs air and otherwise ignores. It rises now because it needs air. The ascent is unhurried. The four flippers pull the body upward with their slow, steady strokes, and the body climbs through the water column, the depth around it brightening as the surface approaches, the pressure in its great lungs decreasing as the weight of water above it decreases, and then the massive head breaks the surface 3 meters from where you float, and the exhalation is a long hollow sound, a breath that has been held for the length of one hunting dive and is now released with the complete unself-consciousness of a body doing what bodies do. 2, 3 breaths, each one the sound of very large lungs working, the sound of a respiratory system engineered for depth and endurance, taking in the air it needs before the next descent. You are close enough to see the texture of its skin. The scales are small, overlapping, the colour of very deep water in strong sunlight, a blue-black shot through with iridescence that shifts from green to purple as the light catches it at different angles. Around the head, the scales are smaller still, and the skin there has the quality of leather tightly stretched, the muscular structure of the massive jaw visible through the skin as ridges and hollows. The eye, you can see the eye from where you float, is large and dark and entirely without expression in any way you can read as human, but it is not vacant. There is something in it, some quality of attention, of awareness, that registers the world as it is rather than as it might be wished. The mosasaur breathes. You breathe. For a moment you are two breathing things on the surface of the same sea, separated by 3 meters of warm salt water and 80 million years of evolutionary divergence, and whatever that divergence means in terms of the different qualities of consciousness or quasi-consciousness, or whatever it is that large-brained reptiles have, that is not consciousness in any sense you would use that word, but is not nothing either. It submerges. The dive is elegant. The body arches slightly, the head going first, then the long neck, then the torso with its 4 flippers pulling alternately in the sequence that generates forward thrust and downward angle simultaneously, then the long tail sweeping once, twice, propelling the rear of the animal downward as the front descends, until the last view you have is the end of the tail, sinuous in the water, and then the surface closes over it, and there is nothing to show it was ever here except a brief swirl of disturbed water that is already dissipating, already being absorbed back into the general movement of the sea, the evidence of the passage of something very large disappearing in the time it takes to draw a breath. The ripple reaches you, a small circular wave gentle as a thought, lifting you and setting you down. You breathe out slowly. The encounter has taken perhaps 3 minutes. The mosasaur will not remember it. You, in whatever sense of you persists across time, will carry something of it, something difficult to name, some residue of having been close to something that large and that ancient and that entirely itself. It is a feeling like the feeling after a storm has passed, a kind of cleared air, a freshness, a sense of proportion restored. The world, briefly, is the right size. Not the size you usually perceive it to be when it is mostly your own concerns reflected back at you from the walls of your daily life, but the actual size, the real size, the size in which a 12-meter lizard-descended apex predator is a normal occurrence in a warm afternoon sea, and you are a small warm floating thing among many small warm floating things, all of you part of the same enormous ongoing event. The sea continues its afternoon with equanimity. You float in it, held by it, carried on its slow and gentle surface. The sky above is the deepest blue it will be all day, and the clouds that have been building in the west since mid-morning are still far away, and the light is still warm, and the Mosasaur is somewhere in the water below, very large and entirely itself, and there is no particular reason to go anywhere at all. You let your body settle a little further into the water. The small muscular effort of maintaining your head above the surface relaxes, and your ears dip below the surface briefly, and for a moment you are inside the underwater soundscape. Muffled, low frequency, the world reduced to bass notes and pressure, and then you lift your head again and the air comes back with its warmth and its salt and its quality of open space. The fish have moved a few meters while you were watching the Mosasaur. They are still there, still grazing. The school's shape different from a minute ago, but its function unchanged. Everything continues. Everything always continues. That is, perhaps, the most reassuring thing about this sea. Its continuity is not performed or maintained, not held together by effort or intention. It simply is continuous, the way water is wet, the way depth is dark, the way the afternoon is warm and the surface is golden, and the Mosasaur has gone back to its world without needing your permission or your understanding. The Mosasaur's passage has stirred something in the chemistry of the water around you. Not dramatically. Nothing here happens dramatically. But in the way that any large body moving through a contained volume of water redistributes the molecules in it, creating local pressure changes, slight temperature differentials where its body heat has been shed, a trace of biological chemistry that dissipates quickly in the moving sea, but is briefly present, briefly a record of its passage. You exist for a moment in the chemical signature of the Mosasaur, in the dissolved traces of a creature that has been hunting this sea since before memory, and then the current takes it away and the water is simply water again. It is downstream now, whatever that means, in an open sea with no banks and no direction, except the slow drift of the current. The Mosasaur's hunting is systematic in a way that does not look like system from the outside, but that is ordered by the geometry of the seaway and the distribution of prey within it, by the thermal layers that concentrate certain fish at certain depths, by the time of day and the state of the tide and the direction of the current, and 1,000 other variables that the Mosasaur tracks, not with instruments, but with the full-body awareness of an animal that has evolved specifically to be exactly here, doing exactly this, in exactly this sea. You watch the place where it vanished into the deeper water. There is nothing to see. That is the nature of deep water. It is a place of vanishing, a place where things become invisible not because they cease to exist, but because the light cannot follow them. The Mosasaur is down there, somewhere in the increasing pressure and diminishing light, and it is entirely real, entirely large, entirely present in its own experience, if Mosasaurs have experiences in any sense you can understand. But to you, watching from the surface, it has simply ceased. The water has closed over it and there is no mark. This is one of the sea's great qualities. It closes. It does not retain the impressions of things that move through it, does not keep their shapes or their marks, does not hold the evidence of their passage in the way that soft mud holds a footprint or ice holds a pressure crack. The sea erases continuously, accepting everything and retaining nothing on its surface, keeping its records only in the sediment far below, in the slowly building archive of the floor that will eventually be chalk. The erasure is not loss, it is accommodation. The sea makes room for what comes next by releasing what came before, and the releasing is not forgetting but something more like graceful completion, the act of setting down something that has been held long enough, of allowing the hands to be empty again so that they can receive whatever comes. You notice now that the Mosasaur has passed, that the smaller fish in your immediate vicinity have rearranged themselves. They were schooling loosely in the upper water, and now they are tighter, closer. the school having contracted around whatever core of shared information caused them all to respond at once to a stimulus that may have been the Mosasaur's pressure wave, or may have been something more subtle, a shadow, a slight change in the water's chemistry, the detection by the lateral line system of a pressure change below the range of ordinary sensation. The school is a single organism in moments like this, all its individual decisions overridden by the collective algorithm of survival, and the decision the collective has made is to be smaller in apparent size, harder to isolate from, more confusing to any predator that attempts to target an individual from within it. As the threat recedes, the school relaxes. The fish spread again, resuming their loose formation, the tension going out of them the way tension goes out of anything once the thing that caused it has passed. They return to grazing. They return to the simple fact of their existence, which is not complicated. Find food, eat food, avoid being eaten, and repeat. You watch them return to their ordinary business with a feeling that resembles more than anything else recognition. Something in the pattern of their relaxation, the way the tightness goes out of them, the way they spread and breathe again, is familiar at a level that has nothing to do with language or thought, that resides in some older part of you that understands, without being told, what it looks like when a creature lets go of its alarm and settles back into the present moment. The sky above is very blue. The deep particular blue of a tropical sky in an era before anything has put significant dust or particulate into the upper atmosphere. A blue so saturated and so clear that it reads almost as a solid, a ceiling of colour rather than a depth of air. Clouds move across it in their slow way, not the heavy grey clouds of bad weather, but the white architectural ones that form in tropical heat and are beautiful without being threatening, that carry their towers of vapour up into the cooler air above and spread their tops into the anvil shapes that the Cretaceous sky is full of this afternoon. The clouds throw their shadows across the surface of the sea. Where a shadow passes, the light changes, the quality of the water changes, the fish below you shift almost imperceptibly in response to the change in the photon flux reaching them through the surface, their bodies calibrated to light in a way that connects them to the sky through the medium of the water, part of the same system, participant in the same vast energetic chain that runs from the nuclear furnace of the sun through 93 million miles of space to the surface of this sea and down through its water and into the living tissue of everything in it. Rest in that chain. Be part of it without needing to understand it. The chain does not require your understanding. It requires only that you float here in the warm water while the afternoon continues, while the mosasaur hunts somewhere below, while the fish school and graze and make their small decisions, while the plankton convert light into life with the infinite patience of things that have no patience because they have no time, only the moment they are in, which for them is all the time there is. The shadow of a cloud passes over you. For a moment the light is softer, the warmth at your skin slightly diminished. The sea around you a different quality of blue, cooler, more shadowed, the surface colour shifting from gold-green to grey-blue and back again as the cloud continues its slow transit of the sky. You follow the shadow with your eyes until it has passed, and the sun returns, and the warmth returns, and everything is as it was. Rest here. There is more to see, more to feel, more of the afternoon to drift through. But right now, in this particular moment, with the water warm and the light golden and the ripple of the mosasaur's passage still settling back into the sea, this moment is complete. Let it be complete. If you are drifting now, let yourself go. Subscribe so the next story is waiting when you return. Sleep well. An ammonite drifts past you at arm's length. It is not in any hurry, which is the first thing you notice about it and perhaps the most important thing, because the ammonite has never been in any hurry, and neither, in this long Cretaceous afternoon, are you. It moves with the gentle pulsing propulsion of a cephalopod, a soft body in a hard shell, the tentacles trailing and gathering and trailing again, the sight-puncle adjusting the gas in its chambers, with a chemistry so refined that calling it a mechanism seems wrong, seems too mechanical for something that has been doing this for 400 million years. The ammonite predates this sea. The ammonite predates this continent, which does not yet exist in the form you know. The ammonite predates almost everything you have ever thought about and a great deal that you have not. It is, in the company of the other long-lived groups in this sea, one of the oldest things present, and its oldness is entirely untroubled. The shell is extraordinary. You find yourself reaching toward it without quite deciding to reach, and your fingers hover near its surface, and you do not touch it because touching it would be a kind of imposition on a thing that needs nothing from you, and instead you simply look. The shell is coiled in the plane of a perfect logarithmic spiral. The same spiral you find in a nautilus, in the seed heads of sunflowers, in the arrangement of galaxies at the largest scale anyone has yet imagined. The ammonite did not choose this spiral. The spiral chose itself, in the sense that a spiral is what happens when something grows outward at a constant rate while also growing forward, and the ammonite has been growing outward at a constant rate while growing forward since it was a tiny larval thing, no bigger than a grain of rice drifting in the plankton layer, which is where it began, which is where almost everything in this sea begins. The outer surface of the shell is ridged. These ridges, called costae by the paleontologists of much later century who will find them pressed flat in limestone, run from the inner coil to the outer edge in long, curving sweeps that echo the spiral of the shell itself, so that the whole surface is a study in nested patterns, the small curve following the large curve following the larger curve, all the way down to dimensions too small to see. The colour is rust and cream, and a kind of deep gold that is not quite brown and not quite orange, and it shifts as you move your head slightly, the way mother of pearl shifts, because the outer layer of the shell is made of calcium carbonate in an arrangement that catches light differently at different angles. The shell is both a record and a current event. The outer ring is the ammonite's present, just formed, still fresh, and the inner coils are its history, each ring a season of growth compressed into geometry. You look at it for a long time. The looking itself is a kind of rest. There is something about attending to a thing with no particular purpose, no analysis, no cataloguing, just the quiet act of looking, that loosens the mind's grip on itself. The ammonite does not require your interpretation. It does not mean anything in particular. It is not a symbol of anything, not in this moment, not in this sea, not 80 million years before the first symbol was scratched into the first cave wall. It is simply a shell containing a soft-bodied animal that breathes and eats and reproduces and will, in a few million years, cease to do any of those things along with every other species it has ever shared this sea with. But that is a long time away. Right now the ammonite is magnificently, completely alive. The soft body within the shell extends slightly from the outer opening. A cluster of tentacles short and ringed with suckers, tasting the water with chemical receptors that are the equivalent, in cephalopod terms, of both smell and taste simultaneously. The tentacles move with a quality of gentle investigation, reaching toward the water and withdrawing, the animal's awareness of its environment expressed entirely through that gentle reaching and withdrawing. There is no aggression in it. There is no urgency, just the slow chemical conversation between the animal and the water it lives in, the ammonite asking the water its questions and the water answering in molecules. It drifts past you and continues on its course, which is no particular course at all but simply the water's preference, the current taking it somewhere without any consultation. The tentacles taste the water as it moves. They are sensitive to chemical gradients, to the faint traces of small prey, zooplankton, small crustaceans, anything soft enough to be engulfed. The ammonite is a predator, though a gentle one by the standards of this sea, a hunter of the very small who would barely register as a threat to anything larger than a shrimp. It goes about its hunting with the same unhurried quality it goes about everything, the tentacles extending and withdrawing with that liquid patience that is the hallmark of the cephalopods. There are many ammonites in this sea. You will see more of them as the day continues and the current carries you. Some will be small, and the size of a thumbnail, new arrivals in the plankton who have not yet grown into their shells. Some will be large, the shell the diameter of a cartwheel, carrying a body that has been perfecting its drift for years. The variations are extraordinary. In this single sea, in this single geological moment, there are perhaps hundreds of ammonite species, each distinguished by subtle variations in the coiling, the ornamentation, the internal suture patterns that will later help a paleontologist sitting in a fluorescent-lit university basement sort one species from another. Right now, those distinctions exist only as differences in chemistry and behaviour, too subtle to observe from the surface. They're all simply ammonites. They're all simply alive. One of them, not the one that passed you but another, slightly smaller, coiling the other way, hovers for a moment in the water a metre below the surface. The light catches it, and holds it in a column of gold. You look at it through the warm water, and it is so perfectly itself, so completely a resolved thing, a thing that has arrived at its form through such an accumulation of solved problems and discarded solutions, that the looking of it feels almost like a privilege, almost like being allowed to see something that is not quite visible in the ordinary way. The shell and the light and the warm water between you and it produce a clarity that is not just visual but something more comprehensive, a clarity of being seen, seeing something clearly. The ammonite's tentacles retract slightly as it encounters something in the water, too small to see from your position, some small organism that it has detected chemically. The tentacles move with sudden interest, reaching, and you watch as the ammonite feeds in the most ordinary possible way, with no drama and no waste, the tentacles bringing their small cargo toward the central beak, and the beak doing its brief quiet work, and then the tentacles reaching again, the animal cycling through its feeding with the efficiency of something that has been doing this same thing for so long that efficiency is no longer the right word. It is just the shape of the thing, the way the shape of a wheel is not efficient rolling but simply rolling. The current takes the ammonite slowly away from you. You watch it go, and watching it go is different from watching it arrive, the departure carrying a quality of completion that the arrival did not have. It came into your field of view without your invitation, and it leaves without needing your permission, and in between those two events something passed. An encounter, the gentlest possible encounter, between you and an animal that has existed in some form since before the first fish had a jaw, an animal that will exist in recognizable form for another 80 million years, in some sea somewhere until it doesn't anymore. The last ammonite leaving the world in a disappearance as quiet as its presence. But that is later, much later. Right now the ammonite drifts on its current and you drift on yours, and the sea accommodates both of you with equal indifference and equal welcome. The afternoon advances by degrees. The sun has moved from its highest point and is tracking its arc westward, the shadows on the water lengthening slightly, the quality of the light warming from the white gold of noon toward the amber of middle afternoon. There are more clouds now in the west, towering and slow, their undersides dark with the weight of water they carry. They are still far away. The storm they carry, if it becomes a storm, will come later. For now, the sea is calm and the sky above you is still mostly open, and the light falls through it with the steady patience of a thing that has been falling for a very long time, and has no particular intention of stopping. You float. The ammonites drift their drifting. The fish pursue their patient harvest. The Mosasaur is somewhere in the deep water, curved around whatever intention drives it, moving through a world it owns completely, and with complete indifference to its own ownership. The Plesiosaur you saw earlier is somewhere in the middle depths, going about its business with the patient efficiency of a successful predator that does not need to hurry because the sea is full and the day is long. Breathe slowly. There is nothing here that requires anything of you. There is nothing here that even knows what requiring something would mean. The requirements of this sea are simple and old. Eat, move, breathe, reproduce, and in between those necessities simply be in the water. You are in the water. You are breathing. The simplicity of it is almost shocking coming from wherever you come from whatever world is full of more complicated requirements. Here, you are reduced to your essentials. Here, the essentials are enough. The water moves beneath you in a gentle swell. Not a wave exactly, but a long slow undulation, the kind of movement that is not caused by wind at the surface, but by some deep disturbance far away, a distant storm or a distant current, or simply the weight of all this water moving according to its own private mathematics. The swell lifts you slightly and carries you and sets you gently down and lifts you again. It has a rhythm to it like breathing, slower than breathing, the breathing of something very large, something that has so much volume that its breathing takes minutes to complete a single cycle. You let your head tip back a little further. The sky is enormous. The sea is enormous. Between them, you are carried, rocked, held, not by intention, but by the simple physics of buoyancy and warmth, the most ancient and reliable combination available. The current shifts slightly, and with it comes a new smell. Not unpleasant. Nothing here is unpleasant, but distinctive. The smell of the open sea, of distance, of water that has come from somewhere far away, and carries the chemistry of that journey in its molecules. The deep upwelling currents bring cold, nutrient-rich water up from the depths, and where that water meets the warm surface layer, the nutrients seed a particularly dense bloom, a concentration of plankton so thick that the water has a greenish cast that is visible from above, that would be visible from a great height, a marker of abundance readable in the colour of the sea. The ammonites are concentrated here. They have drifted into the bloom the way plankton feeders always find their food, by following gradients in chemistry and temperature, by being moved by currents that are themselves moved by the same upwelling that created the food, so that the food and the animals that eat it are gathered together by the same physical process. The sea sorting its inhabitants the way a river sorts its sediment, depositing each thing where the physics determine it should be. You float at the edge of the bloom, the water around you faintly green with microscopic life. The ammonites turning in the current like slow planets. One of them passes directly below you, and you can see its underside, the aperture of the shell, the tentacles withdrawn partially as it drifts on the current, the slight pulsing motion that is not really swimming but is not quite passive either, somewhere between intention and surrender, between going somewhere and being taken. The afternoon has reached that particular quality of middle age where the urgency of the morning is completely gone, and the approaching evening is not yet visible in the quality of the light, and everything inhabits a kind of suspended present in which time is acknowledged to exist but is not pressing. The Cretaceous afternoon is very good at this kind of suspension. It has been practicing it for a long time, longer than afternoons of your particular era have been practicing, and the practice shows. This afternoon has the quality of something that knows itself well, that has no surprises left for itself, that rests in its own nature with the ease of long familiarity. You rest in it too. Your body has found the position that requires the least effort, the angle and posture of complete relaxation in water, and you have stopped adjusting and started simply being in the position, and the position holds you as you held yourself before, and the holding is effortless because the water was always going to hold you anyway. You are helping unnecessarily. You have stopped helping. The sea is doing the work you thought was yours. The ammonites drift. You drift with them, or rather you drift separately but at approximately the same speed, on approximately the same current, the water moving all of you in the same direction, with the impersonal generosity of water moving the things it contains, not choosing any of you over the others, not favouring the ammonite over you or you over the ammonite, just moving everything according to its density and size, and the particular velocity of this current at this depth on this afternoon. There is something deeply restful about being part of that movement. Not special in it. Not selected or elevated or given any particular consideration. Just moved, the way everything is moved, the way everything has always been moved, by water and wind and the slow turning of the world. The water below you descends into darkness. Not immediately, not with any dramatic threshold. It is a gradual thing, the way sleep is a gradual thing, the way a room darkens in the evening, not in a single moment, but in the slow accumulation of many moments, until you find yourself in the dark without having noticed the arrival of the dark. The surface layer, warm and light-filled and alive with the small commerce of planktonic life, extends perhaps 20 metres, 30 metres, depending on how clear the water is on this particular day in this particular part of the seaway. Below that, the light begins to thin, the blue deepens. The colours that were visible at the surface, the rust of an ammonite shell, the silver of a fish, the dark iridescence of a mosasaur's back, begin to resolve themselves into shades of blue and grey, and eventually into a blue so deep it is almost a colour of sound rather than sight, a frequency rather than a hue. And below that, there is the floor. You cannot see it from here. It is perhaps 200 metres down, which is a distance that has no drama to it in ordinary terrestrial terms, but which, in water, in the dark, is as remote as a different world. The floor of the Western Interior Seaway in this part of its existence is soft. It is mud and ooze, and the accumulated rain of organic debris that has been falling from the surface since this sea was first filled. Every dead plankton cell, every fragment of shell, every piece of excrement from every animal that has ever eaten in this water has eventually sunk and settled, and been covered by the next layer of settling, and compressed slightly by that layer, and then covered again. The floor is a record. Not an intentional record, not a document, but a record in the way that a stack of yesterday's newspapers is a record, not arranged to be read, but readable, in principle, by someone patient enough to read it. In a later time, when the sea has long since withdrawn and the sediment has hardened into chalk and limestone, people will climb down into the former seafloor, into the chalk downs and the white cliffs and the pale Kansas bluffs, and they will read it. They will find the ammonite pressed flat, its spiral still perfect but its depth lost, a thing that had been three-dimensional reduced to 2 dimensions by the weight of time. They will find the Mosasaur bones disarticulated, the skull separated from the ribs by the slow drift of water through the sediment before the matrix hardened. They will find foraminifera, tiny shelled creatures even smaller than coccolithophores, in such numbers that the entire chalk formation is essentially a record of their dying. Billions of individual deaths pressed together into cliffs white enough to navigate by on a moonlit night in a different sea, in a different world, in a world that is still being built from the materials that this one is providing. But right now the sea is not chalk, right now the sea is the sea. Right now, on the floor 200 meters below you, there are communities of organisms that have arranged themselves around the ancient logic of the seafloor, things that filter the water for organic particles, things that sift through the ooze for buried organic matter, things that eat those things. There are echinoids, sea urchins, moving slowly across the surface of the sediment on their tube feet, leaving trails in the ooze that will persist for days before being obscured by the next settling of particles from above. They move with a patience that is beyond patience, that is simply the speed at which they move, the speed having been set not by any choice but by the mechanics of the tube foot and the available energy and the temperature of the water, all combining to produce this pace which is the pace of a tube foot in cold dark water, which is very slow. There are bivalves, clams, oysters, their ancestors and their cousins, anchored in the sediment with their valves open, filtering the water with a patience that approaches the geological. They take in the water and they pass it over their gills, and they remove from it the microscopic particles that constitute their food, and they expel the cleaned water, and they take in more water, and they do this continuously, the valve open and the gills working and the heart beating at a rate too slow to call a beat, more of a pulse so long between beats that the animal seems to be contemplating each one before committing to the next. There are worms. There are always worms. The benthos of every sea and every age has its worms, working the sediment, aerating it, processing the organic material that rains down from above, and the worms here are no exception, their burrows threading the floor in patterns that the sediment will eventually preserve and that a paleontologist will one day identify as trace fossils and give a Latin name to and publish a paper about. The paper will be read by a small number of specialists and not by anyone else, and the worm will not know about the paper, and this seems right. The worm's contribution is to the sediment, not to the literature. None of that concerns them. They are simply here. They are simply eating and burrowing and filtering and pulsing in the dark. Above the floor, in the dim zone between the benthic community and the lit surface layer, a different set of organisms moves. These are the deep water fish, adapted to lower light levels and cooler temperatures, their eyes disproportionately large in their small skulls, their bodies elongated and laterally compressed in ways that make them efficient movers through the water column. They ascend in the evening to feed in the surface plankton, and descend in the day to rest in the cooler depths, making this daily vertical migration the way other animals make seasonal migrations, driven by the simple logic of where the food is and where the safety is at any given moment. The migration is not a plan, it is a reflex with a very long trigger. You are thinking about all of this as you float at the surface, or perhaps thinking is not quite the right word. You are letting it drift through your awareness the way the water drifts past your body, without holding it, without grasping at it, just letting it pass through and continue on its way. The knowledge of the benthos, the knowledge of the water column, the knowledge of the chalk in the making, these are not things that demand your attention. They are simply aspects of the same enormous fact, which is the fact of the sea, which is the fact of time, which is the fact of everything being in the middle of itself without any awareness of beginning or end. The swell beneath you continues its slow rise and fall. You have grown accustomed to it now, so accustomed that you barely notice it as movement, perceiving it instead as a quality of the water itself, a property like warmth. You are being held. You have always been being held. The sea held the first life that ever existed in liquid on this planet, held it in its saline warmth, and fed it with dissolved minerals, and gave it the medium through which chemistry could become biology. The sea has been holding things for longer than anything else has been doing anything, and it is very good at it. And right now it is holding you with the same competence, and the same indifference, and the same perfect adequacy that it has always brought to the task of holding things. Somewhere in the middle depths, a school of larger fish moves in that coordinated way that schools move. The individual fish making decisions that are not individual decisions. The group forming and reforming around some principle of mutual safety that produces in aggregate a single coherent body of silver and motion. The school is perhaps 50 meters below you. You can see it, or think you can see it. Or perhaps what you see is just the way the light bends in the water at that depth, the way the column of illumination shifts and catches at the movement of so many small bodies simultaneously. The distinction between seeing and imagining is softer here than it usually is, the warm water and the gentle afternoon having reduced the sharpness of the line between what is present and what is imagined. It doesn't matter. The light is beautiful, the water is warm, the ammonites drift their ancient drift, the floor is building itself, grain by grain, death by death, into the chalk that will one day be climbed upon by people who have no idea what they are walking through, who will look at the white cliffs and see beauty without knowing that the beauty is made of dying, that every white millimetre of it is the compressed remains of something that lived here, in this water, on one of these afternoons. And you are here, at the surface, in the middle of it all, floating in the warm afternoon of a world that will never know your name, and that does not matter either, and that not mattering is a gift you did not expect and would not have known to ask for. Close your eyes, let the swell take you, down, very slowly, up, very slowly, down. The water is exactly the temperature of something you cannot quite remember but that you know you love. The way you know the smell of something from early in your life. The knowledge in the body rather than the mind. Up. The light shifts across your closed eyelids in that amber way. Down. There is nothing to do. There has never been anything to do here. Up. You breathe. Below you the worms work the sediment. Below you the chalk is forming. Below you the deep current moves its slow cold freight of nutrients through the dark. All of it is happening below you, in the invisible world, and all of it is fine, and all of it has always been fine, and the being fine of it has not required your monitoring or your concern. Rest. The sea is doing everything that needs to be done. The transition zone between the lit world and the dark world is not a sharp line but a gradual dimming, a series of thresholds that different organisms experience differently depending on the sensitivity of their light-gathering systems. What seems barely luminous to a fish with large dark-adapted eyes would be absolute darkness to the plankton in the bright surface layer. The sea has many layers, many thresholds, many different versions of what is light and what is dark, and in the space between those versions the food chain has sorted itself into a vertical structure of extraordinary complexity. You think about what lies below you as you float, not with anxiety, there is no anxiety in this thinking, but with the particular wondering quality of someone lying on their back in tall grass and thinking about the sky, a wondering that is comfortable with not resolving itself into certainty, that is willing to let the depths remain depths, the darkness remain darkness, the mystery remain mystery. The chalk is being made below you right now. You understand this in the way you understand other very large and very slow processes, not through any direct sensation of them, but through the knowledge that they are proceeding whether you are aware of them or not, that the world's work continues in all its registers simultaneously, in the warm surface layer and in the cold deep, in the bright noon and in the lightless basement, in the moment you're attending to, and in all the moments you're not. The chalk is building, the record is forming, the future cliffs of Dover are depositing themselves grain by invisible grain on the floor of a sea that does not yet know it will become England. The thought has a quality of vertigo to it, the temporal vertigo of connecting this moment to a much later moment through the medium of accumulated time. But the vertigo is pleasant, a spinning that comes from scale rather than from imbalance. You are very small. The process you're floating on top of is very large and very long and very patient, and being small in the presence of something very large is not, in this sea, on this afternoon, frightening. It is grounding in the particular way that things much larger than yourself can be grounding. They make your concerns seem proportionate, make the weight of the day seem light, make the ordinary anxieties of ordinary existence seem, for a moment, like the small and temporary things they actually are. The water holds you. It has been holding things since before the first cell divided. It knows how to hold things. It requires no instruction from you, no supervision, no maintenance. You can let go of any responsibility you may have been unconsciously assigning to the act of floating and simply float, without effort, without management, on the warm surface of a sea that is very old and very good at its work. Your breathing has become slower without you deciding to slow it. Your hands have opened. Your face has softened from whatever expression it was carrying before you arrived in this water. The evening is still some hours away, and the depth is doing its work below you, and the light is doing its work above you, and you are in the warm middle between them, held and floating, going nowhere at all. A shadow crosses your face. Not quickly. Nothing here moves quickly in the way the word is usually meant. The shadow crosses your face with the slow glide of something very large that is using the air with the same efficiency that the Mosasaur uses the water, banking and turning on extended wings with the minimal effort of something that has been flying for long enough that flight has become ordinary. You open your eyes, or rather you become aware that your eyes are open, and you look up, and there it is. Pteranodons, 3 of them, spiralling in a thermal above the surface of the sea. Their wingspans catching the rising warm air from the water and converting it into altitude with that particular patience of soaring animals, or rather, of the animals that will one day be birds' distant evolutionary relatives, though right now they are simply themselves and owe nothing to the future. Their wings are wide, very wide. The largest of the 3 has a wingspan you estimate at perhaps 7 or 8 meters, the membrane of it stretched between the elongated 4th finger of each hand and the body, taut as a sail and pale as old ivory in the afternoon sun. The membrane is not feathers, it is skin, thickened and reinforced with fibres that run along its span, flexible enough to change shape with each adjustment of the wing posture, but strong enough to bear the animal's weight against the resistance of the air. The heads are remarkable. Long, with a cranial crest that projects backward behind the skull, in a point that balances the long beak at the front, so that the whole head has a kind of swept-back aerodynamic elegance, like a naturally designed shape that happens to also work as a rudder. The crest is not for show, or not only for show, though it is certainly visible from a great distance, and if pteranodons had social lives complex enough to require visual signalling, it would serve that purpose admirably. More practically, the crest provides the same function as the tail of an arrow. It keeps the long beak pointed into the wind during flight, reducing drag, allowing the animal to glide with its skull held steady, while the warm air does the work of maintaining altitude. The largest one is banking now, circling in a wide arc that takes it over the surface of the sea in a long, slow curve, and as it comes around toward you, you can see its underside for a moment. The pale membrane, the body held streamlined between the wings, the legs folded neat and close, the long beak angled slightly downward as it scans the surface. The eye that faces you is large, darker than the sky behind it, and for a moment the pteranodon's gaze crosses yours, or seems to, the angle of its head, the direction of its banking turn, the size of the eye, all suggesting that it has noticed you, that it is in the process of noticing you, assessing you. Then it completes its turn and is looking elsewhere, and the assessment is complete, and you are what you were before, a piece of the surface that is not fish, not prey, nothing worth the metabolic expenditure of further attention. You watch them spiral. They are doing what seabirds will do in this same location 80 million years later, riding the thermal column that forms over the warm water, gaining height for free, and then angling away from the thermal at altitude to begin a long, gliding descent over the surface, during which descent they look down into the water with those large eyes, looking for the silver flash of a fish near the surface, for the disturbance in the water. That means a fish has broken the surface tension briefly in the act of feeding. The largest one banks further. You see it from below, the pale underside of the wing membrane, the dark speckling along the edge, the legs folded neatly against the body in the streamlined posture of a glide. It angles away from the thermal and descends in a long curving approach toward a patch of the surface perhaps 100 meters from where you float. The descent is unhurried. It has assessed the situation from altitude with the patience of something that does not need to be in a hurry because it has the altitude advantage and can use that advantage for as long as the thermal lasts. It reaches the surface. The beak dips into the water with what looks like negligent ease. A brief moment of contact, a slight deceleration, the wings sweeping up and back to arrest the dive, and then it is airborne again, the long beak closing on a fish too small to see from your position, the throat pouch expanding briefly as the fish has moved into it, and the pteranodon is already banking away and climbing back toward the thermal, before the water it disturbed has finished settling. It took perhaps 2 seconds. The fish did not suffer in any meaningful sense. It barely had time to register what was happening before it was somewhere dark and warm, and the only thing left of it was the momentary dimpling of the Cretaceous sea, which was already healing itself, the surface tension restoring itself with that quality of water that has always been its most impressive quality, its capacity for continuity, its refusal to hold the shape of what has passed through it. The pteranodon climbs again, the thermal takes it. It spirals back up with the 2 others, the 3 of them circling in a patient gyre, and from below they look like something drawn on the sky. Clean lines, impossible proportions, an architecture of bone and membrane that is completely resolved, completely beautiful in the way that all genuinely functional things are beautiful because they have had all the unnecessary elements removed by the long process of selection. There is nothing extraneous in a pteranodon. Every part of it is serving a purpose. The crest manages airflow, the large eye gathers light, the folded legs reduce drag, the membrane generates lift, the throat pouch stores fish. The whole animal is a solution, and the solution is elegant, and the elegance is visible from below. You watch them until your neck begins to ache slightly from looking upward. Then you let your head fall back into the water and look at the sky beyond them, the open blue, the slow white clouds still building in the west. The pteranodons continue their circuit above you, moving in and out of your field of vision as you drift, appearing and disappearing like thoughts that return and drift away again, without being firmly grasped. There is a lightness to watching them that communicates itself downward through your body, through the warm water, all the way to whatever state you were in before they arrived. The lightness of flight observed from below, the lightness of things that do not touch the ground. You're not flying, you're floating, which is the water's version of the same idea, being held up by something beneath you that you have not earned and do not have to maintain. You breathe. The sky is wide, the sea is wide, the pteranodons turn in their slow gyre. One of them calls, a sound that travels down to you across the warm air, thin and distant and not quite like anything you have a word for, a sound that is the pteranodon's version of communication, which is to say it is probably not communication in any sense you would recognize, but is more likely a reflexive vocalization, something produced by the body in response to internal states that you could not fully translate, even if you had a dictionary. The sound will not survive in any fossil record, that will leave no trace in the chalk, that exists only in this moment and will be gone when the moment is gone, and the going of it will not mean it did not happen. Things that leave no trace still happen. Things that are unrecorded still occur. The afternoon still passes even when no one is measuring its passage. The 3 pteranodons continue their circuit of the thermal. They will do this for as long as the thermal lasts, which is as long as the warm water continues to warm the air above it, which is most of the afternoon. When the thermal fails as the day cools, they will glide away toward whatever roosting place awaits them on the distant shore, folding their wings around their bodies in the particular roosting posture of pterosaurs, hanging from cliff edges or large branches in the way that their anatomy makes comfortable, their metabolism slowing slightly as the night air cools. But that is later. Now they circle, and the sun is warm and the sea is warm, and the afternoon carries everyone gently through its remaining hours. You close your eyes and feel the warmth on your face and the coolness of the water at your sides and the gentle rocking of the swell and the distance between those things. The warm face and the cool water seems like the whole world, seems like a comfortable and complete version of existence, seems like everything that needs to be true is true. Another pteranodon has joined the 3 circling ones. It arrived from the south, gliding in from beyond the range of easy visibility with the smooth, purposeful arc of a long-distance glider. The kind of flight that covers tens of kilometers in an hour without a single wing beat, riding the air with the mechanical precision of a shape that has been refined for exactly this purpose. It joined the thermal and began climbing, and now there are 4 of them in the column, spiralling upward in a patient wheel that turns at the speed of thought. The fourth one is different from the others in the small ways that individuals within a species differ: a slightly longer crest, a slightly different angle of the beak, a coloration on the wing membrane that is marginally more ochre than the others. These differences would not be visible from this distance on a cloudy day, but the afternoon light is clear and direct and casts clean shadows, and in that clarity the four pteranodons are four distinct things, four separate expressions of the same body plan, each a slightly different version of the same solution to the problem of flying over warm, shallow seas. They are unaware of you in any way that you could confirm. Their attention is directed downward, toward the surface, toward the silver flash of fish in the upper water column that is their entire concern on an afternoon like this. You are not fish-shaped, not fish-sized, not in the water in the way that prey is in the water, and the pteranodons' large eyes are tuned to notice the things they need to notice and dismiss the things they don't, and you're in the category of things they don't need to notice. This is fine. This is, in fact, a relief. The relief of being beneath the notice of the large and capable, of occupying a niche in the world that requires no defense and attracts no attention, of being simply present in the afternoon without any relationship to the hierarchy of predation that structures everyone else's afternoon. You're not in the food web here, you're a witness to it. The distinction is restful. The sun has moved. You notice this in the quality of the warmth on your face, which is slightly less directly overhead than it was earlier, slightly more from the side, producing a warmth that is different in character from midday warmth, less intense, more prolonged, the kind of warmth that seems to sink into the skin rather than resting on it. The afternoon is past its apex and descending toward its long, warm middle, the hours between the hottest point of the day and the beginning of the cooling that precedes evening. This is the most comfortable part of the Cretaceous afternoon, and you are in the middle of it. The pteranodons continue their circuit. You continue your drift. The sea holds all of you with equal indifference and equal patience. Below you, the deep water is dark and cold and full of its own business, and above you the sky is wide and clear and full of the slow turning of enormous wings, and between those two worlds you float in the warm layer that is yours, that belongs to the afternoon, that belongs to nobody and therefore belongs to everyone. Let your body be very heavy. Let your arms float out from your sides like wings that are not flying, like the posture of something that has given up the effort of direction and surrendered to the medium it moves through. The water accepts you. The water accepts everything. That is the one quality the sea has always had and will always have, its great encompassing acceptance of everything that enters it, its willingness to hold. The current has been carrying you, without any decision on your part, toward the shallower waters near the western margin of the seaway. You notice this not as a landmark, but as a change in the quality of the water itself, a lightening, a warming, the bottom beginning to be faintly visible as a pale amber floor through increasing distances of blue-green water that is clear in the way that shallow warm water is clear, with that particular tropical clarity that turns the seafloor into a visible thing rather than an inferred one. The water here is perhaps 8 meters deep, 10 meters, shallow enough that the surface light reaches the bottom with enough energy left to be useful, shallow enough that the algae and the crinoids and the various other organisms that require light have arranged themselves in communities that would not be possible in the open seaway. The lightness of the water here is a different kind of lightness from the surface lightness you have been in all afternoon. Not just brightness at the top, but brightness all the way through, the water column illuminated from surface to floor in a continuity of gold-green light that makes the whole space feel open, transparent, legible. You have come to what this age will, in retrospect, be understood as a reef margin. Not a coral reef in the way a later age would understand the term. The modern reef-building corals will not dominate shallow seas until much later in the history of ocean ecosystems. But a reef nonetheless, in the functional sense, a three-dimensional structure built by organisms whose collective construction creates habitat for other organisms, a self-reinforcing community of builders and exploiters and maintainers that is more than the sum of its parts. The reef builders here are rudists, strange bivalves that grew in tall tube-like columns, cemented together in dense aggregations, their shells the colour of old stone, their living parts housed within the tubes and extending filter-feeding siphons into the water column above. They are not beautiful in the way that coral is beautiful. They are not colourful or delicate or ornate. They are functional in the way that a dry stone wall is functional, sturdy, regular, built to last, indifferent to aesthetic judgment. The columns rise from the sandy floor to perhaps a metre in height, clustered together in groups with gaps between the groups that the water passes through in gentle channels. The rudest colonies have been growing here for a long time, individual animals living for decades, their tubes growing by increments at the top edge while the base is colonised by other organisms, barnacle-like things and encrusting bryozoans and the various opportunists that use the hard surface of any established structure as a foundation for their own existence. Crinoids, sea lilies, extend their feathery arms from holdfasts attached to the sides of the rudest columns, filtering the water with a patience that has characterised the crinoids for so long that patience itself seems too small a word for it. Their arms are jointed and flexible, moving in the current like ferns in a breeze, each arm lined with tube feet that catch passing particles of organic matter and convey them toward the central mouth at the base of the arms. They are not plants, despite the name, despite the appearance. They are animals. Patient, slow, completely non-threatening animals that have been doing the same thing in shallow seas since long before the Cretaceous, since before the dinosaurs walked, since before the first fish evolved its jaw, since before much of anything. The effect of the crinoids en masse is extraordinary. Where they cluster thickly on the rudest columns, they produce a forest effect, a three-dimensional texture to the water that the crinoid arms inhabit, waving and parting and closing, the whole assembly moving together in the gentle current like a field of grain in a soft wind. From above, looking down through the clear shallow water, the effect is hypnotic. Thousands of feathery arms all moving in loose synchrony with the same current, the same pulse of water washing through the reef from one side and emerging from the other, and all the arms oriented to catch that pulse and extract from it whatever it carries. Small fish weave between the rudest columns. They are different from the open water fish you watched earlier, deeper-bodied, shorter, their coloration patterned rather than silver, with dark bands or speckles that break up their outline against the complex visual background of the reef. They investigate the gaps between columns with the particular alertness of fish that live in complicated environments, where what looks like empty space might contain a predator, where the geography of survival is vertical as well as horizontal. A deeper-bodied fish turns and its flank catches the light and the flank is iridescent blue-green, vivid in a way the open water fish are not, the reef fish having no reason for the camouflaging silver that suits the open water, having instead developed colours suited to the complex visual environment of the reef, where colour can signal territory or mate readiness, or species membership. You drift slowly over this community. The bottom is perhaps 6 meters below you here, and you can see it clearly through the warm water, the amber sand between the rudest clusters, the trails left by echinoids moving across the surface, the fan-shaped impressions where something has buried itself in the sediment and is now invisible, presenting only the bivalved edge of a shell, and the current of water being drawn through its filter-feeding apparatus. You could reach down and touch the bottom if you dove, but you do not dive. You simply look, the way you look at something through glass, present at the surface of it, not inside it, and that is fine. The looking from the surface has its own quality, the whole reef visible at once, the pattern of the colonies and the channels between them legible from above in a way that would not be legible from within. A sea turtle passes below you. It is very large, larger than any sea turtle you might have seen or imagined, the carapace spanning perhaps 3 meters, a great dark oval moving through the water with the measured unhurry of a very large animal that does not need to be anywhere in particular. The 4 flippers propel it with the same efficient arc as a modern sea turtle, the same figure-8 motion that converts muscle force into forward propulsion with admirable economy. The head is large, the beak strong, and the animal is heading toward a density of jellyfish you hadn't noticed, drifting in a pale congregation at the edge of the rudest reef where the depth increases slightly. The turtle feeds without hurry. The jellyfish disappear with the deliberate closing of that strong beak, one after another, the turtle moving slowly through the congregation with the systematic patience of a creature that has found a productive patch and intends to harvest it completely. The jellyfish do not flee. They have no mechanism for fleeing. They drift their drift and are eaten, or are not eaten, and the difference to them is not registered in any way that involves the word difference. They are simply here and then simply not here, the absence as unremarkable as the presence. The turtle is aware of you, its head turns briefly in your direction, and the eye that faces you is dark and large and old in the way that all reptile eyes seem old, carrying within them a quality that is not intelligence exactly, but something adjacent to intelligence, a very long experience of what the world is, accumulated not in the mind of this individual animal, but in the shape of the species itself, in the reflexes and the anatomy, and the capacities that have been refined across so many generations that the refinement is now structural rather than learned. The turtle has seen things like you before, or things that occupy the same position in its taxonomy of the world, which is large object near the surface, no chemical signature of prey, no behavioural signature of predator, probably irrelevant. It returns to its jellyfish. You're not interesting. You're not a jellyfish. You drift on. Above the reef, the water is warmer than in the open seaway, and the warmth communicates itself through your body in a wave that begins at your skin and moves inward, the way warmth does when you have been cool and finally arrive at a warm place, and feel your muscles release the tension they had been holding without your knowing they were holding it. You'd not known you were cool, you were not cool, but the additional warmth is welcome regardless, and you let it happen to you, and the letting is easy. The reef margin continues beneath you, the rudest colonies giving way to sandy patches and then to more colonies, the crinoids waving their patient arms, the fish weaving their intricate passages through the architecture of shell and stone. The sea turtle has moved away into the deeper water, its dark shape receding until you can no longer see it, the water swallowing it back into its blue uncertainty. There is a particular piece to shallow water, the visibility of the floor, the warmth, the complex inhabited texture of the reef below you, all of it combining to produce a sense of enclosure that the open sea does not provide, a sense of being in a room rather than in a vast open space, a comfortable room, a room made of water and light and the soft movement of crinoid arms, a room with no walls and no ceiling except the sky, and yet a room nonetheless, gathered and intimate in the way that productive shallow water is always intimate. You drift above the reef in the warm amber light of the afternoon, and the reef proceeds below you with its ancient business, and you're simply here, passing through, a visitor in good standing, holding your temporary place in the water column while the permanent residents go about their permanent work. The reef margin is not silent. Beneath the surface of the water, and you're floating with your face tilted slightly toward the sea, breathing at the surface, your ears just below the waterline, there is a continuous texture of sound that is not quite what you would call noise, but is sound, in the sense that the medium is transmitting information, pressure waves propagating through the water from the biological activity of the reef and its inhabitants, the snapping of small crustaceans, the low-frequency grinding of creatures that eat coral, the faint click of fish teeth on hard substrate, all of it arriving at your submerged ears as a kind of geological hum, a frequency range lower than the sounds of the open sea, deeper and more textured, the sound of a place where things live in very close proximity to each other, and that proximity produces a continuous low-level conversation. The sea turtle that drifted past you earlier is somewhere above the reef now, and you can watch it from your position at the surface, a dark shape moving in slow arcs over the pale substrate, the flippers stroking in that particular long unhurried motion that makes sea turtle swimming look less like locomotion and more like a form of deliberate ease, as if the turtle has decided that the world can wait for it, that the reef will still be there when it arrives, that there is no benefit in hurrying through a medium that is already doing most of the work. The turtle pauses above a large coral head. It hangs in the water for a moment, head angled slightly down, the dark eyes examining the surface of the coral with an attention that seems concentrated, purposeful. Then the beak descends and closes on something soft growing on the coral surface, a sponge perhaps, or a particularly tender section of the coral itself, and the turtle's jaw works briefly and it is moving again, stroking away with those long, unhurried sweeps, already past the coral head and moving on to the next thing. You watch the turtle move through the reef the way a person might move through a familiar market, pausing at some stalls and passing others, selecting what it wants with the accumulated expertise of long experience. The turtle does not know it is experienced. It does not reflect on its experience or know it as experience. It simply moves through the world it has always moved through, doing the things its body has always done in the place where those things have always worked. The light on the reef changes as the afternoon advances. The sun is no longer directly above and its angle through the water has changed, the shadows that the coral heads cast on the sandy substrate between them lengthening slightly, the angle of the light making the colour contrast sharper, bringing out the oranges and purples of the encrusting organisms on the coral faces that the noonday light washed flat. The reef is more beautiful, if more beautiful is meaningful here, in this angled afternoon light than it was at noon, or more visible in certain ways, more dimensional. The shapes given depth by shadow in the same way that all three-dimensional things are given depth by shadow, the world revealing its volume when the light stops being directly overhead and starts coming from the side. You drift over the shallow area at the reef's edge, the bottom visible and close, perhaps 4 meters below you in the clearest part, perhaps 8 or 10 where the channels between coral heads deepen. The clarity of this water is extraordinary. No sediment, no industrial discharge, no agricultural runoff, nothing but the clean chemistry of a sea that has been running its own filtration system through the organism-covered substrate for millions of years. The visibility makes the depth irrelevant in one sense. You can see the bottom as clearly as if there were no water between you and it. But the depth is still real, still present as the particular kind of distant that water creates. The bottom, reachable in principle, but not casually. Rest here at the reef's edge. Let the warmth of the shallow water come up through you. Let the sounds of the reef's quiet business continue in the register below speech. The turtle is somewhere over the deeper side now, a shadow against the sky-blue water. The coral has resumed whatever it was doing before you arrived, which is the same thing it does always, which is grow, very slowly, toward the light. The afternoon has been aging toward evening while you were not watching it. You become aware of this not by looking at the sun. You have not been tracking the sun, you have been floating and drifting and letting the day happen around you without accounting for it, but by a quality in the light that has changed in the way that light changes in the late afternoon, a shift from the overhead clarity of midday towards something longer and more horizontal. The sun now at an angle that stretches the shadows out across the water in directions that midday never allows. The colour of the light has deepened. What was white gold at noon is now the particular amber of late afternoon, a colour that seems to slow everything it touches, to make the fish swim a little more slowly, the ammonites drift a little more gently, the whole sea breathe a little more deliberately. The clouds that were building in the west have not arrived. They are still out there, their towers climbing into the upper atmosphere, their bases dark with the promise of rain, but they are moving slowly and the evening air between here and there is still clear and warm and carrying the faint salt mineral smell that has been your constant companion since you arrived. The storm will come or it will not come. Either way, it will not come yet. The surface of the sea has changed with the light. During the day, the surface was alive with a particular kind of activity. The constant small disturbances of feeding fish, the periodic breachings of animals coming up for air, the wind-driven chop that kept the surface in motion, the whole complex dance of a living skin on a living body. Now, in the lower light, much of that activity is shifting. The surface-feeding fish are descending, responding to some light threshold that tells them that the exposure of the surface is becoming less useful than the relative shelter of the deeper water. The pteranodons are climbing away toward whatever shore or roosting place awaits them, their silhouettes becoming smaller and more distant until they are simply specks against the amber sky and then nothing at all, absorbed into the distance the way all things are eventually absorbed into distance if you wait long enough. Other things are rising. From the middle depths, from the dim zone between the plankton-rich surface and the dark benthic floor, organisms that spent the day in cooler, safer waters are now making their nightly ascent. You cannot see them yet. They are still below the zone of good visibility, but you feel the change in the water, a slight increase in the density of life in the column below you, a thickening. By full dark, the surface layer will be crowded with animals that were invisible to you during the day. Tiny crustaceans, the larval stages of things that will later become very different things. Bioluminescent organisms that require darkness to display the light they produce. The full nocturnal community of the Cretaceous sea surface emerging from its daytime retreat. For now, in the transition between the two, the sea is at its most peaceful. This is the hour that has no drama. The diurnal community is withdrawing, and the nocturnal community has not yet arrived, and the surface of the sea rests in the amber light with a quality of suspension, of breath held gently between exhale and inhale, the pause at the bottom of breathing that is not emptiness but fullness, the moment of complete transition, complete balance, the day and the night equally close and neither one dominant. Everything that will be true of the night is becoming true, and everything that was true of the day is becoming past tense, and in between those two truths there is this, the amber light, the still surface, you floating in the pause. A stillness settles over you that is not the stillness of absence but of presence. You are very much here. The warmth of the day is still in the water, stored in the upper layers with that thermal inertia of water that makes the sea cooler in summer and warmer in winter than the land nearby, moderating the extremes of the air, maintaining the temperature of life. The warmth in the water now is the accumulation of the entire day's solar input, all those hours of light converted into heat, and it surrounds you as completely and as comfortably as anything has ever surrounded you. You are not cold, you will not be cold. The water will retain this warmth long into the night, long after the air above has cooled, and if you were to stay here, the water would keep you warm in the dark. The colour of the water itself has changed. The blue that was bright and clear in the midday sun has deepened toward the blue-green of late afternoon, and that blue-green is warming toward the amber-green of the lower sun, and the whole surface of the sea has a quality now of polished metal, of something that holds light rather than transmitting it, a mirror that is not quite reflective, but that holds the last of the day's colour in suspension, not reflecting the sky above, but blending with it, the sea and the sky becoming the same amber in the last of the light. Far to the east, the first intimations of dusk are already visible. Not darkness yet, not nearly darkness, but a deepening of the blue in that direction, a quality of the sky beginning its own transition toward the deep indigo it will become. The sea beneath that part of the sky has already taken on its nighttime character, a flat darkness that reflects the sky's deepening, the surface smooth and still and closed. You float between the two states, between the still amber west and the deepening east, in the pivot of the day. Something brushes your leg beneath the water, not a threatening something. There is no threat in this, no urgency, just the passage of a large jellyfish, its bell pulsing with that slow hydraulic rhythm that is the jellyfish's only motion, its trailing tentacles extending downward into the water column in a loose curtain. The jellyfish is translucent, faintly pink, the bell catching the amber light from the surface and diffusing it through its jelly body in a way that makes the whole animal glow softly from within, like a lantern made of water. It passes below you without pausing, without registering your presence in any way that registers as registration, simply continuing its drift, with the complete indifference of something that does not know it is drifting. The jellyfish trails away beneath you and descends and is gone. The water closes behind it. There are more of them, you notice now, several jellyfish visible in the water around you at different depths, their bells pulsing in that slow, asynchronous rhythm that produces, in aggregate, a kind of very slow music, each pulse slightly out of phase with the others, the whole assembly moving through the water in a loose congregation that is not quite a school, and not quite a solitary drift, but something between the two, something that has no word for it because it requires no word. The evening deepens by imperceptible degrees. The amber light becomes gold, and the gold becomes orange at the horizon, and the orange is brief and intense, and then it fades toward rose, and the rose fades toward the pale grey-pink that precedes the first real dark. You watch all of this happen to the water around you, the sea becoming the colour of the sky at each moment, the sea and the sky entering the evening together, neither one leading, neither one following. You breathe with the sea, and the sea breathes with you, and the old amber light falls across the water and across your closed eyes, and holds you very gently in the turning of the world. The day has been long and full. It has contained multitudes, the Mosasaur, the ammonites, the pteranodons, the reef and its inhabitants, the plesiosaur's brief attendance at the surface, the whole warm afternoon of the Cretaceous sea. You have been through all of it. You're still here. The sea is still holding you. The evening is coming in the gentle way that the best evenings come, without drama, without announcement, simply by being later than before. The transition from afternoon to evening in the Cretaceous is not marked by any clock. not announced by any system, not divided from what came before by any boundary that the sea itself recognizes. It is simply a continuation of the same process that has been occurring all day, the planet turning, the sun's position in the sky changing, the light arriving at progressively different angles and with progressively different qualities, and the continuity of that process means that there is no single moment when you can say the afternoon ended and the evening began. There is only the afternoon becoming the evening, and you inside that becoming, watching it unfold with the patience of someone who has nowhere else to be. The water's colour has shifted. Through the afternoon, the surface was a green-gold mixture of the water's own colour and the reflected sky, a colour that belongs uniquely to tropical seas in full afternoon sun, that is not quite either of its components but a mixture that has its own quality, its own particular relationship to the light. Now, as the sun descends, the gold is deepening toward amber, and the green is yielding to blue, and the combination is different, richer, more layered. The sea at dusk has depth in its colour that the midday sea lacks, the evening light able to make visible in the water's surface what the overhead sun washes flat. The small fish near the surface have become less active in the gradual cooling of the upper water. The plankton bloom is still dense around you, but the grazers have pulled back slightly from the surface layer, dropping down by a metre or two to the slightly warmer water beneath the surface chill, and in the space they've left the surface is cleaner, clearer, a thin skin of still water with less biological turbulence in it than there was an hour ago. You watch the light change with a feeling that you might call peaceful if you were looking for a word, though the word does not quite capture it because peaceful implies the absence of something that was previously present, and here nothing has been absent to begin with. There is no turbulence from which peace is a relief. There is only the evening becoming slowly more itself, the quality of the light shifting through its range of warmth toward the deep amber that precedes the gold of sunset, the world settling into the long slow exhale of the afternoon's end. The sky in the west, where the sun is going, has developed a complexity it lacked at noon. The clouds that were building there through the afternoon have grown into full towers now, the tops spreading into flat anvil shapes, at the altitude where the troposphere meets the stratosphere, the undersides lit by the lowering sun in shades of deep orange and rust that the noon sky could not have produced. The shadows between the towers are blue-grey that contrasts with the lit faces in a way that makes the clouds look three-dimensional, solid, like enormous structures of a different material than air. You watch the clouds build and glow. The light from them falls onto the surface of the sea and the sea reflects it back, so that the light is both above you and below you simultaneously, or rather above you in the sky and around you in the water's reflection of the sky, and you float inside the doubled light with a feeling of being completely surrounded by warmth, completely held within the amber of the late afternoon in all its dimensions. Somewhere behind you, where the evening approaches from the east, the sky is already a different shade, the beginning of the transition toward the deep blue of pre-night, the first hint of what the sky will be when the sun is below the horizon. But that is behind you, and you are facing west, and the west is still full of light, still full of the active business of the sun's departure, still hours from the moment when it will slip below the horizon and the long, warm Cretaceous evening will begin its own particular register of beauty. For now, warmth. For now, colour. For now, the surface of the sea holding everything in the amber of the hour, and you floating in the amber, going slowly nowhere, watching the world turn from afternoon into evening without any effort from you and without any expectation. In the last of the afternoon light, a plesiosaur surfaces near you. Not the small one you saw earlier. This is a different animal, or perhaps a different species entirely. The neck that rises from the water is long, longer than you expect. It rises from the surface with a quality of emerging that takes longer than emerging should take, the water peeling back from the dark skin in sheets, the vertebrae, and there are many of them, more vertebrae in this neck than in the entire body of most mammals, describing a gentle S-curve as the head reaches the surface and the nostrils open. The neck is perhaps 2 meters long, perhaps more, an architecture that has no parallel in the living world you came from, that seems improbable until you have watched it for a few seconds and the improbability resolves itself into a kind of sense, a solution to the problem of reaching fish that are distributed through a water column. The plesiosaur breathes. It is a sound like nothing you've heard before, and also a sound that is entirely recognizable. The intake and expulsion of air from large lungs, the particular quality of breath that belongs to a large warm-blooded or near warm-blooded marine reptile that has been below the surface for several minutes and is now restoring its oxygen supply with the calm efficiency of an animal that has done this 10,000 times and will do it 10,000 more. The sound travels across the water to you in that peculiar way of sounds at sea, clear and carrying, slightly distorted by the distance, arriving a moment after the visual event, so that for an instant you see the breath, and then hear it, the way lightning and thunder separate in a storm, the wave of information arriving in two separate registers. The plesiosaur does not appear to notice you. Or rather, it appears to have noticed you and made a decision about you, that you're neither food nor threat, and having made that decision, it has allocated no further attention to you. It breathes. It surveys the surface with those large dark eyes, the scleral ring visible as a faint sheen in the low light. Its body is mostly submerged, the silhouette of the barrel trunk and the four wide flippers just visible as dark shapes below the waterline, the neck and head the only parts in the air. The flippers move with a slow sculling motion that keeps the animal in place against the slight current without effort, the way a bird hovers in a headwind, using just enough energy to maintain position without committing to movement. You find yourself very still in the water. Not from fear. You have established that fear is not quite the right register for this sea, for this quality of evening light, for this ancient and ordered world. You are still from the same impulse that makes you still when you encounter a deer in a wood or a heron at the edge of a pond. The awareness that stillness is a kind of courtesy, a way of not imposing your presence on something that has not asked for it, that is simply there, simply being what it is, and whose being what it is has a value that does not require your participation or disruption. There is a generosity in being still. It is a way of saying, I am here, but I do not require anything from you. The plesiosaur holds at the surface for perhaps 3 minutes. It breathes 4 times, each breath the same, efficient, unhurried, the chest expanding and contracting with a regularity that is almost mechanical but is not mechanical, is entirely biological, is the rhythm of a living body doing what living bodies do when they are not being asked to do anything else. Then the neck begins its descent, the curve reversing itself, the head dipping below the surface first, the neck following in a continuous motion, the dark barrel of the body rolling slightly as the animal angles downward, the hind flippers lifting briefly above the surface and then submerging, and then there is nothing but the water and the evening light and the widening rings of the plesiosaur's departure spreading toward you across the calm surface. You watch the rings come, they reach you and rock you gently, once, twice, 3 times diminishing, and then the sea is as it was, or almost as it was. The space where the plesiosaur's neck was is full of air again, of low evening light, of the ambient sounds of the sea at dusk. But the space is slightly different, slightly weighted by the memory of the presence, the way a chair is slightly different after someone has sat in it and risen. Plesiosaurs will be in the sea for the remainder of the Cretaceous. They are in the sea now in many different sizes and forms, occupying different ecological roles with the variety that characterizes successful groups. The long-necked ones hunting fish in the shallows and mid-water zones, the short-necked ones taking larger prey in deeper water, the giant pliosaurs of an earlier time having already retreated into the past, leaving their ecological niches to be filled by the mosasaurs and the large sharks and whatever else the sea provides in the way of apex predation in this particular century. The group has been in the sea since the early Jurassic and has radiated into dozens of species, each exploring a slightly different ecological niche, each carrying the same fundamental body plan: barrel trunk, 4 flippers, neck, head, in varying proportions. It is a successful body plan. It has endured for 130 million years by the time it ends, which is more than most body plans achieve. The plesiosaur is not a failure or an experiment or a dead end. It is a profound success, measured by the only metric that evolution uses: duration. It has lasted. That is the whole achievement. That is the entirety of what survival means, and the plesiosaurs have achieved it for so long that calling it survival seems inadequate. It is more like mastery, though mastery implies effort, and what the plesiosaur has achieved is something beyond effort, something that is simply the way things are. The darkening water around you has a quality of depth to it that was not there in the midday sun. The transparency that let you see 10 meters, 15 meters down is reduced now, the lower light not penetrating as far, the world below you becoming more opaque, more self-contained, the creatures of the deep water moving through a darkness that the surface will not illuminate until morning. You're at the boundary between the visible and the invisible, floating at the edge of a world that is vast and full and fundamentally unknown to you, and that unknown is not disturbing but restful. The unknown of the sea at dusk is restful in a way that the unknown of many things is not, because it is not a mystery that requires solving, it is simply there, it simply is. You cannot know what is happening 10 meters below the surface in the dark water of the Cretaceous evening because you are not there, and the tools for knowing it will not be invented for 80 million years. That not knowing is total, and therefore peaceful. There is no tension in it. You cannot reach toward the answer because there is no reaching that would help, and so you rest in the not knowing the way you rest in darkness, not fighting it, not trying to make it into light, just settling into it and letting it be what it is. The first star appears. Or rather, you become aware of the first star. It has been there for some time, waiting for the sky to darken enough to reveal it, and now the sky has cooperated and there it is. A single point of light in the blue-going indigo overhead, steady and cold and infinitely far away, burning with a kind of permanence that makes everything below it. The sea, the plesiosaur, the ammonites, the chalk in the making you, seem very briefly very brief. But briefly brief is still brief, and brief is still alive, and alive is still here, and here is still warm, and the water is still holding you, and the evening is coming in the way the evening always comes, and it is fine. The star burns its ancient light across the space between you. You receive it. You have always been receiving it, this light that left its source so long ago that the source itself has changed in the interim, burning its way toward you across the vacuum, arriving at your eye in this warm Cretaceous evening with the patience of something that had nothing better to do than travel for a very long time. You breathe. The plesiosaur is somewhere below you now, doing whatever plesiosaurs do in the dimming afternoon water, hunting or resting or simply moving through the world it inhabits, with the unconscious authority of something that belongs there completely. The sea continues, the evening continues, you continue, held and warm, in the last amber light of the Cretaceous day. The plesiosaur is not alone. You notice this now that the first one has settled into its slow surface drift. Another shape, slightly smaller, moves below and slightly to the side, its four flippers describing the same unhurried rhythm, its neck angled the same careful degree downward. They are moving in the same direction at approximately the same speed, close enough that it would be natural to call them a pair, though whether that word means anything in terms of their relationship to each other is impossible to know from the surface. The larger one surfaces again, 2 breaths, the sound of them the same as before, the hollow exhalation, the deeper inhalation, the brief pause at the surface, and then the long neck curves and the head goes back under, and the body follows in that same smooth rotation, the hind flippers last, lifting briefly above the water before disappearing. The smaller one surfaces a moment later, in the same spot the larger one left, as if following a path that has been established by use, by the accumulated passages of many plesiosaurs over this same stretch of water at this same hour over many years. You wonder, floating here, whether there are paths in the sea. Not physical paths, the water leaves no marks, but habitual routes, corridors of preference, places where the water temperature or the food distribution or some factor more subtle than either creates conditions that animals return to repeatedly, and that, over generations, come to be known to the young of those animals through learned behaviour or through the more ancient mechanism of instinct, which is learned behaviour compressed into genetics by time. The sea does not show its paths. The sea does not show very much at all, which is one of the reasons it remained relatively unexplored and unknown for so long in the era that follows this one. A sea does not wear its history on its surface the way a landscape does. The sea renews itself constantly, but below the surface, in the layers and the chemistry and the sediment, the history accumulates, layer on layer, in the language the sea has always used to remember what has passed through it. The plesiosaurs drift southward, or in the direction that the current takes them, which is not necessarily south, but feels like a direction, feels like intention, even if intention is too strong a word for what a plesiosaur has when it moves through the water at the end of a day of hunting. They grow smaller in your field of vision as the current takes them, and they go about whatever the next hours hold for them. More hunting, perhaps, or the search for whatever form of rest a plesiosaur takes at night. The lowered metabolism and reduced movement that passes for sleep in a large marine reptile that must continue breathing throughout. You watch them go with the particular quality of attention that watching something depart produces, which is different from the attention of watching something arrive. Arrival focuses forward, toward what is coming. Departure focuses backward, into the wake of what is leaving. The space the plesiosaurs occupied is now simply space. Water, the same water it was before they were in it, having accepted and then released them with equal ease. The first star appears in the east, not dramatically, not announced, just present suddenly where it was not present a moment ago, or rather present and visible where it was present but invisible, before the sky darkened enough to make it findable. A single point of light, very faint, barely distinguishable from the last blue of the sky around it, but there, the first star of the Cretaceous evening. The same star it will be 80 million years later, though in a slightly different position because the proper motion of stars across the sky is slow but real. You see the star, you breathe. The plesiosaurs have gone beyond the range of your easy vision, and the sea is empty of large things in your immediate vicinity, and the evening is settling in around you, with all the unhurried completeness of evenings that have been practicing their arrival for the entire life of the planet. Let the evening come. It has been coming for a very long time. Let it complete its arrival while you float here in the warm dark that is not yet quite dark in the first moments of the Cretaceous night. If you are drifting now, let yourself go. Subscribe so the next story is waiting when you return. Sleep well. The dark comes slowly, as it always does over open water. There is no moment when the day ends and the night begins, no switch, no threshold. Just the gradual deepening of the sky from indigo to violet to black, and in that deepening the gradual revealing of more stars, one by one and then in clusters, until the whole of the sky above you is dense with them in a way that you have perhaps never seen the sky, in any age you belong to, because the light that usually obscures them has not been invented yet. There are no cities here. There are no fires large enough or numerous enough to cast a glow on the horizon. There is no industry. There is no electricity. There is nothing that produces light as a side effect of human intention. The stars above the Cretaceous Sea appear in their original number and their original brightness, the sky as it was before anyone thought to compete with it, and they are extraordinary. The Milky Way is visible as a river across the sky, not as a faint suggestion of brightness as you might see it from a dark hilltop in a later century. Here, in the complete absence of any competing light, the Milky Way is a structure, three-dimensional, densely populated, the individual stars it contains not resolving into distinct points, but merging into a band of soft continuous light that has a texture to it, the way the surface of the sea has texture when you look at it up close. You are looking at the edge-on view of the galaxy you inhabit, and it contains more stars than there are grains of sand on the floor of the sea below you. More stars than there are individuals of every species that has ever lived on this planet combined. And the looking of it should be terrifying, but is not. The sheer scale of it takes the anxiety out of scale. There is simply too much of it to be afraid of. You can only look and feel yourself become smaller in a way that is entirely comfortable. A reduction in the perceived importance of your particular concerns that is not diminishing but freeing. And then the sea begins to make its own light. You see it first at the edge of your hand where it moves through the water. A faint blue-green flash, vanishingly brief, there and gone before you're sure you saw it. Then again from a different angle. Then from below you, a deeper pulse of cold light that illuminates the water column for a fraction of a second and shows you, briefly, the shapes of things moving in the dark water. The trailing tentacles of something, the quick dart of a small fish, the slow undulating passage of something longer, all of it visible for less than a second before the darkness returns. Bioluminescence. The Cretaceous Sea at night is a sea of living light. The dinoflagellates, single-celled organisms in the plankton layer that produce light when they are disturbed, have risen to the surface with the nightly migration, and every movement in the water triggers them, Every wave, every passing animal, every current creating a brief flash of cold blue-green fire. Where the swell passes through the dense populations of dinoflagellates, the water glows in lines and curves, the pattern of the waves made visible in light, the sea drawing itself in bioluminescence on the surface of itself. The waves glow faintly as they move. The wake of each small disturbance writes itself in light and then erases itself. The sea a palimpsest of brief illuminations, each one replacing the last. Around you, everywhere you look, the water glows and dims and glows again. A fish passing below you leaves a trail of light, a long curved line of blue-green that persists for several seconds after the fish has moved on, a signature written in the sea and slowly erasing itself as the disturbed dinoflagellates cease their light production and settle back into darkness. An ammonite, disturbed by the fish's passage, sends out its own pulse of light as it jets away, a brief bright point that expands and dims. The water itself seems to be thinking in light. Not intentional thought, not directed thought, but the organic expression of a system so complex and so interconnected that it produces something that looks like thought, that has the quality of a slow and patient intelligence settling itself for the night. You move your hand through the water and the light follows it. Trails of blue-green fire curl away from your fingers and dissolve. You make a circle with your hand and the circle glows briefly and fades. You make a figure 8 and it glows and fades. Every movement you make writes itself in light, and then the writing erases itself and the sea is dark again until the next movement, the next disturbance, the next dinoflagellate triggered into its brief cold fire. You are writing and erasing simultaneously, and the writing is beautiful, and the erasing does not matter. And the whole process, writing and erasing and writing again, is the most honest description of anything that has ever been written. Above you the stars burn their ancient light. Below you the sea burns its brief living light. You are between the permanent and the ephemeral, between the light that has been travelling for billions of years to reach your eye and the light that exists for a fraction of a second in a single cell before extinguishing itself. Both are light, both are real. The difference between them is only time, and in the Cretaceous night time has become so vast and so unhurried that even that difference seems less significant than it usually does. The star's light and the dinoflagellate's light are both just light, both just the electromagnetic expression of energy, both just the universe producing light, because that is one of the things the universe does. The water is warm, the night air is warm. In this part of the world, in this period, the climate is warmer than anything a later century would call temperate. The poles are largely ice-free, the global average temperature several degrees higher than the maximum temperatures of the age that will follow, and the warmth is distributed through the whole system, through the deep water and the shallow water and the atmosphere above, a planetary embrace that has been consistent for millions of years and will continue for millions more. You feel that warmth now as a continuation of the day's warmth, barely diminished by the evening, the water around you still carrying the stored heat of the long Cretaceous afternoon. Your body has a slight weightlessness to it that you may not have noticed during the day, but that the night makes more apparent. The total darkness below you removing the visual evidence of depth and leaving only the felt fact of buoyancy, of being held above the darkness by nothing more than the chemistry of salt water and the physics of density. You're floating on an invisible surface. The water below you is dark and the water around you is dark, and the only thing that distinguishes the surface from the depth is the fact that you are here, at the surface, held here by the slight difference in density between your body and the water. A bioluminescent wave moves through the water below you. A pulse of light, blue-green, moving outward from some disturbance deep in the water column, expanding as it rises, reaching the surface around you in a ring of soft light that turns the surface briefly to pale fire and then fades until only the starlight remains. You breathe out slowly. The stars above are very many. The sea below is very deep. Between them, you are held in the warm dark, and the living light continues its patient conversation with itself, the sea writing itself in brief fire and erasing itself and writing again, and the night progresses through its ancient hours, and you drift with it. Not toward anything in particular, not away from anything in particular, simply moving with the slow and irreversible current of time as it has always moved, as it is moving now, as it will always move, the most constant thing in the world. Your breathing has slowed. You may not have noticed this happening, but it has happened. The rhythm of your breath adjusting itself over the hours of the evening and the dark to something closer to the rhythm of the sea itself. Slower, deeper, each breath more complete than the last, each exhalation more thorough, the space at the bottom of each breath a little wider, a little more spacious, a little more like the pause between waves. Let the bioluminescence light the water around you. Let the stars burn their ancient light above you. Let the dark water hold you in its dark warmth. You have drifted very far from wherever you were before, and the distance is entirely comfortable, and there is no need to return tonight. The bioluminescence is not uniform across the surface. It concentrates where the plankton concentrates, which is in the areas of highest nutrient upwelling, in the eddies where warm and cool water mix, along the edges of the thermal gradients that structure the sea vertically and horizontally both. Your movement through the water creates a bow wave of disturbance that moves the plankton and causes them to flash, and the flashing travels out from you in a ring that expands across the surface, diminishing as it goes, until the plankton that are too far away from the original disturbance to have been triggered by it are simply glowing their ordinary background glow, the faint blue-green luminescence that is the sea's nighttime ambient light. You have been surrounded by living light for some time now, long enough that it has stopped being remarkable and started being simply the condition of the night, the way warmth is the condition of the afternoon, the way salt is the condition of the water. The light belongs to the sea. The sea has always had this light in some form. The bioluminescent organisms are among the oldest light producers on the planet, their chemistry refined over hundreds of millions of years to produce light with extraordinary efficiency, no wasted heat, just the cold blue-green of oxidized luciferin doing its brief work and resetting for the next time. You reach into the water and bring your hand up. In the air, the drops of water on your palm glow faintly for a moment, before the plankton in them are disturbed enough by the change in environment to stop glowing and settle back into their dark resting state. But for that moment your hand is full of small lights, each drop carrying its fractional creature, each creature carrying its fractional chemistry of light production. The whole system in your palm too small to be significant and too beautiful to be anything other than exactly what it is. The sky above you is now fully dark except for the stars. The Cretaceous stars are very bright, the atmosphere is clear, and there are no competing lights anywhere on the surface of the planet, and they are numerous in a way that stars in any later era will struggle to match. The Milky Way, a dense river across the sky that seems almost solid, almost substantial, a structural feature of the night rather than a faint suggestion of distant suns. You can see the galaxy from within the galaxy, which is not a common perspective and is not available to very many creatures in the long history of organisms sophisticated enough to notice such things. Below you, in the deeps, the bioluminescence continues in different registers. The deep water organisms have their own chemistry of light, producing different wavelengths, different patterns, different durations of flash, some as lures, some as warnings, some as communication between individuals of the same species, some for reasons that are not decipherable from the surface, even if you could see them, which you cannot. The deep light is its own world, self-contained, operating according to its own rules in its own darkness. The surface layer glows. You float in the glow. Your body in the water is outlined in blue-green wherever it meets the plankton in sufficient concentration to be disturbed by your presence. A ghost of light that moves with you, that defines the boundary between you and the water in a language made of living chemistry rather than shape or shadow. You are not frightened by this. You are not frightened by any of it. Not the Mosasaur, not the depth, not the darkness, not the strange alien beauty of a world without any of the names and structures that make your ordinary world legible. You are not frightened because there is nothing here that wishes you harm in any personal sense, nothing that has singled you out for attention, nothing that makes demands on you. The sea makes no demands. It only offers warmth, support, the company of its inhabitants, the slow, patient spectacle of an ancient world going about its ancient work. You have been offered all evening, and you have accepted all of it, and none of it has cost you anything. You have simply been here, watching, floating, letting the night complete itself around you. Beneath the warm surface where you float, the water is in motion in ways you cannot see. The surface has its waves and its swells and its wind-driven chop, all of which are visible and felt. But below the surface, at depths where no wind reaches and no swell penetrates, there are other currents, slower, colder, driven not by wind but by the differences in temperature and salinity between different water masses, by the rotation of the planet, by the shape of the basin that contains the sea. These deep currents move at speeds almost incomprehensible in their slowness, meters per day, sometimes meters per week. But they move enormous volumes of water, and they have been moving those enormous volumes for as long as the sea has existed, and they will continue to move them long after this sea has become chalk and Kansas and eventually something else entirely. The Western Interior Seaway is connected to larger oceans at its northern and southern ends. At the north, it opens into the Proto-Arctic Ocean, cold and deep, a body of water that has not yet accumulated its ice because the planet has not yet cooled enough to produce polar ice at any latitude, the Arctic of the Cretaceous being more like a warm marginal sea than the ice-covered ocean it will eventually become. At the south, it opens into the warm, shallow waters of the Proto-Gulf of Mexico, and beyond that, into the ancient Tethys Ocean that divides what will one day be called Laurasia from what will one day be called Gondwana, and beyond that, into all the oceans of the world, which are all one ocean in the end, one connected body of water that moves as a single system, driven by the same physics, regulated by the same chemistry, expressing the same ancient and vast self in every sea and in every ocean, and in every drop of water that falls as rain and returns through river and underground aquifer to the sea from which it came. The deep current beneath you is cold. You would feel it if you dove, if you went down perhaps 50 meters and let the warm surface layer give way to the thermocline, that transition zone where the temperature drops quickly from the warmth of the surface to the chill of the deep, a few degrees per meter, the water becoming first pleasantly cool and then definitely cold, and then, deeper still, very cold indeed, the kind of cold that belongs to water that has not been near the surface for a long time, and has been on a journey that began somewhere far away, and will end somewhere else equally far away, carrying whatever it has picked up along the way. The deep current carries nutrients. This is perhaps the most important thing it does, more important than the transport of heat and cold, more important than the regulation of climate, more important even than the role it plays in the chemistry of the atmosphere. The deep current carries the nutrients that fall from the surface, the bodies of dead plankton, the excrement of larger animals, the organic matter in all its forms, and cycles them back upward in zones of upwelling, bringing them back to the surface layer where the light is, where the photosynthesis is, where the base of the food chain is. Without upwelling, without the deep current returning nutrients to the surface ocean would be starved, the plankton bloom would diminish, the fish would diminish, and eventually everything would diminish in a cascade of absence that would leave the sea clear and beautiful and empty. The deep current is the breathing of the sea. Not the surface breathing, the wave-by-wave exchange of oxygen and carbon dioxide at the surface. The breathing of the whole ocean body, the slow ventilation of the deep water, the return of what has sunk back to where it can be used again. It is the reason the sea is not a graveyard. It is the reason the plankton you have been floating in all day are as abundant as they are, fed by nutrients that arrived at the surface after a journey of centuries through the deep dark water. A journey so slow and so certain that it has the quality of geological process rather than hydrological process, the water moving with the patience of stone. You think about this as you float in the warm dark, the stars overhead and the bioluminescence dimming now as the dinoflagellates exhaust their immediate light-producing capacity and settle into a quieter mode. The sea is quieter now than it was at dusk, the nocturnal community that replaced the diurnal community itself beginning to fall into the slower rhythms of the deepest night. The large animals, the Mosasaur, the Plesiosaur, are somewhere in the dark water, breathing and moving and eating with the patience of things that have no need of sleep in the way you have need of sleep, or perhaps sleeping in their own way, the way some large predators sleep, with one part of the brain alert and the other part resting, a half-wakefulness that has no parallel in your experience, but that clearly serves its purpose, given the duration of the lineages. The night sounds of the sea reach you across the surface. Not sounds in the air, there are no sounds in the air except the gentle wash of water against water, and the occasional distant call of something you cannot identify, a sound that might be a pterosaur settling on a wave, or might be the vocalization of something you have no name for. The sounds of the sea are in the water, the low-frequency groans and clicks and pulses that travel through water with far less attenuation than through air, the sonic landscape of the Cretaceous sea at night, which is full and complex and largely below the threshold of human hearing, a music played on instruments you cannot perceive. The sea speaks to itself in infrasound and ultrasound, in pressure waves and chemical gradients, in all the frequencies available to it that are not available to you, and you float in the midst of that conversation, unable to hear it, surrounded by it. There is a particular quality to being surrounded by something you cannot perceive. It is not the quality of exclusion. You're not outside the conversation, not locked out of it. You're simply in the part of it that exists below the frequency range of human hearing, and below the wavelength range of human vision, and outside the chemical range of human smell. The sea is having this enormous conversation around you, and you are part of it in the sense that your presence here is itself a fact the sea registers. The displacement of your body changes the local pressure, your warmth changes the local temperature, your breath changes the local chemistry. But you cannot perceive your participation in real time. You only know, abstractly, that it is happening. That abstract knowledge is enough. It is, in fact, exactly enough. The current beneath you shifts slightly. A gentle lateral movement, almost nothing, the kind of change that you register not as movement, but as a slight alteration in the direction of the warmth at your side. The current is moving you, incrementally, across the surface of the Cretaceous sea, taking you somewhere else in the seaway at the rate that sleeping takes you somewhere else in yourself. Too slowly to measure, too gradually to mark, but consistently and with complete certainty. You are going somewhere. You have always been going somewhere. The going does not require your participation. The stars overhead turn on their slow arc. The Milky Way has shifted its position slightly since you first saw it, the planet's rotation carrying you underneath a different section of the galaxy's edge. The deep water carries its cold freight of nutrients through the dark at its own unhurried pace. The warm surface holds you, still and rocking, your body finding its level, your breathing finding the rhythm of the sea's breathing, your weight becoming something the water takes on without complaint and without noticing the taking. You are very close to sleep. You have been close to sleep for some time. The Cretaceous night is patient with you. It has been patient with everything for 80 million years. It can afford a little more patience. There is no rush. There is no schedule. The night will be as long as the night is, and when it ends it will not be because you rushed it, but because the planet turned and the sun returned in its own time. And all of that happens whether you are sleeping or not, and the best thing you can do with that information is let it free you from the need to monitor the process. Rest. The deep current is doing its work. The sea is breathing. Everything is in motion in the direction it is already going. The deep current that moves below you is carrying something that has been in the water for a long time before it reaches this place. It began somewhere cold, far to the north or south, where the surface water is cold enough to be denser than the water beneath it and sinks, descending to the floor and flowing along it toward the tropics in the slow river of thermohaline circulation that connects the poles to the tropics and back again. A circuit so slow that the water you're floating on top of may have last been at the surface thousands of years ago before it descended and began its long journey through the deep. The deep water carries cold. It carries dissolved gases, oxygen for the organisms at depth, carbon dioxide from their respiration, traces of everything that has been absorbed or dissolved in the water during its long time at depth. It carries the chemical signatures of the geology it has flowed over, the minerals leached from the basalt of the ocean floor, the organic compounds shed from the rain of particles that has been falling through the water column since the last time this water was at the surface. The deep water is a chemical record, an archive, a river of accumulated information about the world it has moved through. When this deep water upwells at the margins of the sea, pushed to the surface by the geometry of the currents, by the shape of the sea floor, by the direction of the wind at the surface, it brings all of that accumulated chemistry into the light. It brings nutrients that have been accumulating at depth, since long before any of the organisms currently living at the surface were born. It seeds the surface layer with phosphates and nitrates and iron and silica, and the plankton explode in response. The bloom visible from space as a change in the colour of the sea, and the food chain builds upward from that explosion with the speed that always follows abundance. You are floating on the beneficiary of the deep water's generosity. The warmth you feel, the richness of life around you, the clarity of the water, the density of organisms in the surface layer, all of it is downstream from the upwelling, downstream from the deep water completing its circuit and giving up what it has been carrying to the organisms that can use it. The sea is generous with its stores. It gives everything it has to the surface, and the surface gives it back as particles that fall and sink and become the deep water again, and the circuit continues, and has continued, and will continue. You think about continuity without quite meaning to, about the water you are floating in, which has been water since the planet was young, and which will be water long after everything currently living has been dead for longer than it was alive. About the same molecules of hydrogen and oxygen cycling through the hydrosphere over geological time, passing through the bodies of uncountable organisms, spending time in the atmosphere as vapour and in ice as solid, and here in the deep currents as cold, saline liquid. The water is not young. The water has never been young. The water is as old as the planet, and it shows no signs of that age except in the continuity of its properties, its consistent willingness to be water, to do what water does, to carry and dissolve and connect and fall and rise again. Your body is mostly water. The water in you and the water around you are not categorically different things. They are the same substance in slightly different configurations, the same molecules arranged in slightly different ways, and the boundary between inside and outside, the boundary that the surface of your skin makes between you and the sea, is a boundary of arrangement rather than a boundary of substance. The night carries this thought gently. The water holds it the way water holds everything. You breathe in and out above the surface and below the surface. The deep current continues its slow transit of the floor, and the organisms in the middle water go about their vertical migrations, and the bioluminescent glows and dims and glows again, and the Cretaceous night proceeds with the complete indifference to observation that characterizes the whole history of the world before the first observer. To the west, at the edge of the visible world, there is land. You can smell it before you can see it, or perhaps you can imagine the smell, the green, humid exhalation of a continent covered in vegetation so dense and so alive that the air above it carries the chemistry of growth as a constant presence. The complex organic compounds released by the leaves of flowering plants, the earthier notes of fern and horsetail, the resinous sharp quality of the conifers that stand above the lower canopy, in groves so old that individual trees have lived through decades without taking particular notice of anything. The air that drifts across the sea from the land carries all of this, or would if you were close enough to smell it, which you're not quite. You're far enough out that the sea smell is dominant: salt, minerals, the organic complexity of the surface plankton, the particular quality of open water air that has no land in it at all. But on certain gusts, in certain moments when the wind shifts slightly toward the west, there is something else, the faintest green note, the shadow of the land's exhalation, arriving at you across the kilometers as a suggestion rather than a scent. But you look toward it, and in the dim starlight and the faint ambient bioluminescence, you can see a low dark line at the horizon where the sea meets something solid, a presence that is not sky, that is not water, that has the quality of earth and stone and the weight of a continent arranging itself into the future. The western shore of the Seaway is a complicated thing. It is not a beach in the way you might imagine, not a clean pale line between sea and forest. It is a delta, a spread of river mouth and marsh and coastal swamp, where the great rivers that drain the young Rocky Mountains to the west bring their sediment down to the sea and deposit it in layers that spread outward into the shallow coastal water, building new land from the material that rain has eroded from the mountains since before the mountains finished rising. The mountains themselves are young. The Laramide orogeny has not yet delivered the full expression of what the Rockies will become, but the early stages of the uplift are already producing heights significant enough to cause the wet westerly air to rise and cool and deposit its rain on the western slopes, and that rain erodes the new rock and carries it in rivers to the sea. The delta is the meeting of two things in motion: the sea advancing and retreating with the slow pulse of sea level change, and the land advancing outward with the patient deposit of sediment. Between them, the delta is a negotiation, and like all negotiations between large systems, it is ongoing, never concluded, both parties constantly adjusting to the latest position of the other. In that negotiation, life has found many footholds. The coastal swamps are dense with vegetation of a kind that has no parallel in any later century. A mixture of angiosperms and ferns and cycads and conifers, all interleaved at different heights. The lowest layer a dense ground cover of ferns whose fronds in the Cretaceous are often larger than a human being, and above them the shrubby flowering plants that are newcomers to this world. Recent evolutionary experiments that have not yet become dominant, but are clearly on their way to dominance. Their flowers bright even in memory, visible in daylight as pale smears against the deep green of the vegetation, attracting the insects and the protobirds that will help them reproduce and spread. Above the fern layer a middle canopy of taller plants, and above that the conifers, enormous, ancient, towering above everything else, with the patient authority of things that predate flowers, and will outlast flowers, and regard the whole angiosperm experiment with the equanimity of something that has survived everything the Mesozoic has thrown at it. The conifers here are not like the pines of a later world. They are broader, softer in their silhouette, the needles wider and the cones larger, the bark darker and more deeply furrowed, the whole tree having a quality of weight and permanence that younger tree lineages do not yet possess. And in the vegetation, among the roots, and in the canopy and on the ground between the trees, the dinosaurs. From your position on the sea you cannot see them, and even if you could, the darkness now makes the land into a dark smudge rather than a visible landscape. But they are there. You know they are there the way you know a city is there when you see its glow on the horizon at night. Not the thing itself, but the evidence of it. The suggestion. Hadrosaurs in herds, moving through the coastal forests with the slow, browsing patience of large herbivores, their duck-billed heads working through the fern layer, their bodies massive and warm and producing the particular sounds that large animals make in dense vegetation, the crack of a broken stem, the displacement of air and leaves, the low calling between individuals that keeps the herd coordinated in the dark of the forest. Ankylosaurs, low and armoured, moving the leaf litter with their broad beaks, their scale-covered backs invisible against the dark floor of the forest. And somewhere in the forests something that watches, that waits, that has the posture of a predator even in stillness. The large theropods of this coast, tyrannosaurids, perhaps, or their immediate ancestors in this moment, are there in the forest dark, their breath rising in the warm humid air, their position known to the hadrosaurs by something more reliable than sight, smell, and the particular silence that falls when a large predator is close. The sea and the land have existed in this relationship for the entire duration of the seaway. The sea fed the land with moisture and moderated its temperature, and the land fed the sea with the nutrients that rivers carry, the dissolved minerals from the weathering of rock, the organic debris that washes from the coastal swamps into the shallows, the occasional carcass of something that drowned or died near the shore and drifted out to sea and was consumed by the mosasaurs and the sharks and the other marine predators before it reached the floor. The exchange is constant and reciprocal, and has no beginning and no end. You look at the dark line of the shore for a long time. There is something about knowing that there is land over there, that there is weight and solidity and the smell of earth and the sound of animal life in the trees, and the particular quality of darkness that trees make, different from the darkness of open water, that makes the sea around you feel both more itself and more complete. The sea is the sea because there is land. The land is the land because there is sea. Between them, the most productive ecosystem in the history of life on this planet has arranged itself in an endlessly negotiating margin of marsh and delta and shallows and reef. You are on the seaside of that meeting, far enough out that the shore is a line rather than a place, and you look at the line and feel the comfort of knowing it is there without needing to go there. The sea is a stuff. The sea is exactly enough. The dark water and the warm air and the stars and the occasional pulse of bioluminescence below you, and the distant smudge of a continent building itself toward the future, all of it exactly enough, exactly the right amount of world for a night like this, for a person floating in the dark of the Cretaceous sea with nothing required of them except to be here and to breathe and to let the night continue. A small wave lifts you and sets you down, another. The rhythm of the swells continues, as it has continued since before the shore appeared on the horizon, as it will continue after the shore is gone, as it will continue after the sea is gone, and the chalk is white cliffs, and the white cliffs are sand again, and the sand is in a sea again, a new sea, in a new world, in a future that this present moment is not required to anticipate. The land is there, the sea is here, the night holds both, you breathe. The darkness between you and the shore is populated with things you cannot see. The shallow coastal water between the reef and the river mouth is one of the most productive habitats in the seaway, warmer than the open water, rich with the nutrients that the rivers bring, sheltered from the full force of the open sea, structured by the submerged topography of delta channels and oyster bars and shallow mudflats into a complexity of microhabitats that no single organism can fully exploit but that many organisms can partially exploit. The overlap between their ranges producing the abundance that fills the shallows. You drift in the direction of the shore without intending to, the current carrying you slightly westward, not close enough to reach the delta, but close enough that the water around you has begun to acquire the characteristics of coastal water. Slightly warmer, slightly more turbid, slightly richer in the organic particles that the river water carries, the clear blue-green of the open sea shading toward the green-brown of coastal influence. In this coastal water, at night, the activity is different from the open ocean. The fish that live in the shallows are smaller on average, faster, adapted to the complex geometry of their environment in ways that the open water species are not, more lateral in their movement, more accustomed to rapid direction changes, more alert to the possibilities that structure provides for both prey and predator. The mosasaurs that hunt here are smaller than the ones that cruise the open water, adapted to the shallower habitat, using the same basic body plan, but in a more confined version, suited to hunting in water that does not offer the long unobstructed lines of pursuit that the open sea does. A small shark passes below you. You can see its pale underside in the bioluminescent glow, the smooth torpedo shape of a shark whose length is perhaps 2 meters, moving with that characteristic unhurried deliberateness that sharks have maintained unchanged from their earliest ancestors through the entire subsequent history of life in the sea. The shark does not deviate from its course. Its course does not intersect with you in any consequential way. It passes and is gone into the dark water ahead of it, and the dark water closes and there is nothing to mark its passage except the memory of a pale shape against the faintly glowing deep. The land remains a dark line. The stars above it are the same stars as above the open water, but something about their position relative to the horizon, their relationship to the low dark mass of the shore, gives them a different quality here. More intimate, perhaps, the sky seeming lower when there is solid ground beneath it, the stars closer to being overhead than to being everywhere. You listen. Across the water from the shore, faintly, too far to be certain of, there is sound. Or you imagine sound. The creak of large animals moving through dense vegetation, the percussion of something heavy crossing shallow water, the distant bass note of an animal calling in the dark forest. These sounds may be real. They may be the imagination of a mind that knows what lives over there and is composing the soundtrack that should accompany the visual. It does not matter. Real or imagined, the sounds give the dark shore its proper character, its proper density, its proper sense of being inhabited by something ancient and alive. The current shifts again, and you begin to drift back toward the open water, the influence of the coast receding, the water clearing, the bioluminescence brightening as you move back into the plankton-rich surface layer of the open sea. The shore remains a dark line. The shore will remain a dark line for as long as you are here. It does not need to be anything more than a line to be everything it needs to be. You breathe. The night holds. The land is where the land is. The sea is where the sea is. You're in the sea, in the night, in the Cretaceous, in the warm dark that is large enough to hold all of this and ask nothing in return. The rain arrives without announcement. Not with thunder, not with lightning. Those will come later if they come at all, and tonight they seem to be content to remain theoretical, a potential rather than an actuality. The rain arrives simply with rain. A change in the air, a slight cooling of the temperature on your face, and then the first drops, widely spaced and large. The kind of drops that fall from a cloud that has been building all afternoon and is now releasing its content with that particular unhurry of tropical rain that is not a downpour at first, but a conversation, a preamble, the rain saying, "Here I am arriving. You have a few minutes to notice me before I am fully here." You notice. Each raindrop strikes the surface of the sea with a sound like a very soft word, not a word with meaning, not a word in any language, just the acoustic event of water meeting water at a slight velocity, producing a small crown of drops that disperses immediately, and a ring that moves outward in all directions and then is subsumed by the next ring from the next drop. The rings from the first drops are widely spaced and large, and you can watch each individual ring expand and flatten and disappear before the next one arrives. You count the seconds between drops. 4, 3, 5, 2, the spacing irregular in the way that individual drops from a forming rain are always irregular, the cloud not releasing all its water at once but beginning at the edges of saturation, the heaviest drops falling first while the lighter ones continue to accumulate within the cloud. The rain is warm. This is the thing about rain in the Cretaceous. There is no cold rain here, not in this latitude, not in this climate. The rain has fallen through warm air and has not had the distance or the temperature gradient to become the kind of rain that makes you cold, the kind of rain that drives you indoors. It falls warm on your upturned face and mixes with the sea, without the temperature shock of cold water meeting warm, just water meeting water, the distinction between sky water and sea water erasing itself on contact, the two bodies of water, the falling and the fallen, becoming the same body of water the moment they touch. You let your face tilt toward it. There is something deeply good about rain on an upturned face in the dark, something that does not require explanation or analysis, something that the body understands directly without the mediation of thought. The rain cools your face slightly after the warmth of the afternoon, and each drop is a small distinct sensation, a gentle percussion on your skin, and the sound of it, the increasing density of the drops on the surface around you, the soft white noise of a light rain on open water is one of the best sounds there is, one of the sounds that the body knows means something. You're not sure what the body knows it means, but it knows it means something good. You are not inside, you are the outside, and it is still, unexpectedly, one of those sounds that makes you feel sheltered. The rain intensifies slightly, not to the point of a downpour, but to the steady moderate rain that fills the air with drops so numerous that the surface of the sea is in constant agitation. No longer the calm mirror it was in the hour between dusk and the first drops, now a surface in continuous motion, the rings and crowns and ripples overlapping in a texture that extends in all directions to the edge of visibility. Each section of the surface is different from every other section, the rings from different drops in different stages of expansion, the crowns of different heights depending on the speed of the drops that produced them. And yet the whole surface has a coherence, a unity of character, a recognizable texture that is simply rain on water. In the bioluminescent patches, the disturbance from the rain triggers a continuous gentle glow. The whole surface around you is dimly lit from below, the accumulated agitation of billions of dinoflagellates producing a soft ambient light, and above it the rain falls through that light in straight lines, each drop visible for a fraction of a second as it catches the bioluminescence on its way down. The effect is extraordinary. You're inside a column of light and rain, held between the glowing sea and the starless sky, and the rain is the connection between them, falling through the bioluminescent light and striking the luminescent surface, and the light is brief and the rain is continuous and the night is warm. You have no thought to share with this. It is not a thing that produces thoughts. It produces only presence, only the awareness of being in a particular place at a particular moment that has not happened before and will not happen again, a moment that is complete in itself, that requires no interpretation and no preservation, that simply is and then will simply have been. Everything that happens to you here is in the past tense before it is over. Everything is becoming memory as it occurs, and the memory of rain on warm water in a dark sea is one of the best memories available. The rain falls for perhaps an hour, though you have lost your ability to measure time in the way that produces hours as units. It might be 30 minutes, it might be longer. The rain falls and the sea accepts it, and you float in the acceptance, the surface of the sea rising imperceptibly as trillions of raindrops add their small fractions of volume to the larger volume, the sea growing by an amount too small to measure but growing nonetheless, receiving the gift of the rain as it has always received every gift the atmosphere has offered, without ceremony, without gratitude, simply by absorbing. By the time the rain eases, the drops becoming less frequent, the sound of it softening, The rings on the surface widening and spacing out as the rain becomes a drizzle, and then a few large drops widely spaced and then nothing. The night has reached its deepest point, that middle of the night quality where the earlier hours are remote and the dawn is still genuinely far away, and the world is more itself than it is at any other time, stripped of the performances of day and the anticipation of morning simply being what it is in the dark and the quiet. The cloud that brought the rain has moved eastward and broken apart or will break apart, and the stars are returning section by section across the sky, revealed by the cloud's retreat, each section of newly clear sky adding its stars to the accumulating field until the Milky Way is restored and the sky is the deep, complex, luminous thing it was before the clouds came, perhaps even brighter for the contrast, the stars looking very clean and very close after the rain. The sea settles back into its post-rain calm. The surface is smooth in a way it was not before the rain, somehow washed smooth by its own disturbance, the small residual wave patterns damped out, the texture simplified. You float in this smoothness. The rain has changed the quality of the night the way sleep sometimes changes the quality of a problem. The agitation has passed through the system, and in passing through has resolved something. The surface that was complex now simple. The noise that was present now absent. The rain was warm, the rain is gone. The sea holds you in the aftermath of the rain, which is one of the most peaceful conditions available to a body floating in the dark on an ancient sea, and you allow yourself to be held by it completely, letting the smoothed surface and the returned stars and the residual warmth of the rain-washed air be exactly the world you need, which it is, which it has been all along. The rain has been falling for long enough now that it no longer feels like an event. It has become a condition, the way the warmth is a condition, and the dark is a condition. Something that is simply true about this moment in the way that certain facts are simply true, not arguable, not temporary, not subject to revision. The rain is here. The rain has been here. The rain will continue for as long as it continues, and when it stops it will stop in the same way it arrived. Without announcement, without drama, simply becoming less and then not. You have been listening to it with the part of your mind that is not asleep. That part is very small now, very quiet. The part that registers sound and temperature, and the slight movement of the water, but does not process any of these things into meaning or urgency. That simply receives and releases, receives and releases. The way the surface of the sea receives the rain, and releases it into the larger volume of the water, absorbing everything without being changed by any individual thing. Your face is wet with rain. Your face has been wet with rain for some time, and you have stopped registering this as a separate sensation from the general warmth and moisture of the night air. The boundary between your skin and the night has become theoretical. You are warm and wet and floating, and the rain is warm and wet and falling, and the sea is warm and wet and holding, and there is not much to distinguish between any of these things at this level of awareness. Below the surface, and your ears, which have been at the waterline for hours, have become accustomed to the way sound travels differently through water than through air. The rain adds its own sound to the underwater world. Each drop penetrates the surface and creates a small bubble, and the bubble collapses and produces a sound that travels through the water in all directions. A tiny pop that joins the millions of other tiny pops and produces in aggregate a sound like static, like the white noise of a very large number of very small events happening simultaneously. The underwater sound of rain is one of the few sounds that is approximately the same in the Cretaceous as it will be in every later era, because rain has not changed and water has not changed, and the physics of a drop of water penetrating a surface and making a bubble have not changed. This particular sound has been in the sea for as long as the sea has had rain, which is approximately as long as the sea has existed. The rain eases slightly, not stops, just becomes a lighter version of itself, the drops spacing out, the sound of each individual drop becoming separable from the aggregate again, the rings on the surface widening as the drops become fewer. You can hear the individual drops again. This one, close and clear, that one further away, a more muffled sound. One quite far off that arrives as a barely perceptible dimpling of the sound rather than a splash. The lull lasts for a few minutes, and then the rain resumes at approximately its former intensity, the lull having been a pause in the cloud's release rather than an end to it. Rain, here, is not a disruption. Rain is not weather, in the sense of weather being something that happens to the day and changes its character. Rain here is simply part of the night, as integral to the Cretaceous evening as the bioluminescence and the stars and the slow pulse of the swells. The night contains the rain the way it contains everything else, with complete accommodation, with no preference for the rain over the calm or the calm over the rain. You close your eyes against the drops on your face. With your eyes closed, the experience simplifies. There is only the sound of the rain and the warmth of the water and the slight rocking of the swell and the rhythm of your own breathing, which has slowed further in the last while, which has reached the slow, deep rate of a body that has finished its thinking for the night and is content to simply breathe and be breathed, to accept the oxygen and release the carbon and continue the basic business of existence without any of the elaboration that waking thought adds to it. The deepest part of the night holds a silence that is different from all the other silences. Not the silence of waiting, not the silence of listening, not the silence of something about to happen. This is the silence after all that needed to happen has happened, and before the first faint suggestion of what will happen next has arrived. It is a genuinely empty silence, or a silence so full that it reads as empty. The way a note held at perfect pitch reads as stillness rather than sound. The Cretaceous sea at this hour, deepest night, hours before the dawn, the stars at their zenith and their transit, the whole sky rotating on the slow axis of the planet's spin, is in this silence. You are in it too. Your breathing has slowed to the rate of someone who is almost asleep, or perhaps of someone who has moved through sleep and come to a resting place on the other side of it, a place that is neither awake nor dreaming, but simply continuous, simply ongoing, simply the act of existing without commentary. Your body has become something the water holds rather than something that holds itself, the small muscular adjustments that keep a body oriented in space having relaxed into the simpler task of letting the water do that work, which the water does perfectly, which the water has been doing for the entire night without complaint or effort. The sea around you in these deepest hours is quiet, in a way the earlier night was not. The nocturnal surge of activity that accompanied the nightly vertical migration, the zooplankton rising, the fish rising after them, the bioluminescent organisms responding to all that disturbance, has settled. The zooplankton have fed, and the fish have fed, and the small commerce of the night has proceeded to its completion. And now the surface layer is in that post-feeding stillness that is the ocean's equivalent of the after-dinner quiet, when everyone is satisfied and the table has been cleared and there is nothing to do but sit in the warmth and let the night continue. Below you, the deep water is absolutely still in the way that deep water is always still. Not truly still, because no water is truly still, but still in the sense of moving so slowly that the movement is below any threshold of perception, the slow creep of the deep current carrying its cold and its nutrients through the dark at a pace that makes glaciers seem hurried. In that deep water, far below you, things are happening that have always been happening and will always be happening. The settling of particles, grain by grain and cell by cell, the slow accumulation of what will become chalk, the movement of the bottom community, the worms turning the sediment, the echinoids grazing the ooze, the bivalves filtering the water with a thoroughness that means nothing is wasted, the occasional slow passage of a large animal moving through the deep water on its night patrol, its body displacing water in a column that rises up through the depth and reaches the surface as a barely perceptible pressure change, a ghost of movement, a memory of something large passing far below. The night has its own geology, if you look at it in the right frame. Each night in this sea, some quantity of material settles to the floor that did not settle the night before. The addition is imperceptible, a film of sediment thinner than the thinnest piece of paper you have ever held, distributed across the entire floor of the seaway, which is hundreds of thousands of square kilometres. In the total darkness of the deep water, the settling is invisible, or would be invisible if anyone were there to see it, which no one is, which no one has ever been, which no one will be until the creatures capable of the concept of darkness develop the means to reach it. The settling happens in complete darkness and complete silence, in the absence of any observer, with the perfect indifference of chemistry and gravity to the question of whether anyone is watching. And yet the record forms, the layer forms, the chalk forms. And 80 million years later, give or take the margin that makes a million years a Tuesday, Someone will look at the chalk layer in a road cut in Kansas and see, in the thickness of that layer and the chemistry of it, and the microfossils it contains, a record of this night. Not this specific night. Not this rain, not this particular mosasaur, not the particular ammonite that drifted past your shoulder in the afternoon. But the night, in the aggregate sense, in the chemical sense, the record of a warm sea in the middle of the Cretaceous, a sea that was alive and warm and full of light-producing organisms and large predators, and the slow, patient work of microscopic builders, a sea that built itself into chalk while nobody was keeping score. You are floating on a record being made. Everything that happens tonight, every organism that eats and is eaten, every drop of rain that fell and entered the sea's chemistry, every ray of the day's sun that was absorbed by the surface water and converted to heat, every organism that died and began its slow descent to the floor, all of it is being recorded in the forming sediment, layer by imperceptible layer, in a language made of chemistry rather than words, more durable than any words, more complete than any chronicle. You will not be in the record. You leave no chemistry here, no shells, no bones. Your presence in this night is as complete and as unrecorded as a thought. You are here and you will leave no evidence of having been here, and that is fine. The sea does not require your evidence. The record it is making is not for you and was not made for anyone. It is simply what happens when time passes through matter, the material world noting the passage of time in the only language available to it, which is the language of accumulation and settling and compression, and finally stone. The stars have reached a certain position in the sky that marks the deepest point of the night. You cannot read that position as a time, because the constellations you know are not these constellations. The stars themselves are in slightly different positions, their proper motion across 80 million years having rearranged the sky enough that the patterns are almost but not quite familiar, like a translation of a poem you know very well, recognizable in structure and mood but not in any single word. The sky turns above you, the sea turns below you, very slowly in the slow gyres driven by the planet's rotation. You turn with them, at the same slow rate, the same patient revolution, the night carrying you from where you were toward where the dawn will eventually come from, not quickly, not soon, but with the certainty of things that have always happened and will always happen. You breathe, the stars burn, the sea holds, the chalk grows. Everything is exactly as it should be, in the deepest and most absolute sense of that phrase, which is the sense in which should means is, in which expectation and reality have collapsed into a single undifferentiated fact. Let yourself be very still now. Let the night have you completely. The stars have moved. You know this not by watching them. You have not been watching them with any focused attention, but by the way the sky has rearranged itself in the intervals between moments of awareness, the way a room rearranges while you sleep and you wake to find things slightly different without being able to say when they changed. The stars in the west are lower than they were. The stars that were overhead when you first lay back and looked up are now past their zenith, past their highest apparent point, beginning the long, slow descent toward the western horizon that they will complete in the small hours. The night is moving through you and around you with the same patience with which it moves through everything else. You are very still, not with the stillness of effort, not the stillness of holding yourself quiet, but the stillness that comes after all the smaller movements have been made and none remain to be made, the stillness of having settled as far into the water and the night as it is possible to settle, without becoming part of them entirely, which is not entirely possible, but which the body approaches as an asymptote, always getting closer, never quite arriving, the distance between you and the sea becoming very small but never becoming zero. The water is warm, it has been warm all night and it remains warm, the thermal mass of the sea resisting the cooling of the night air above it, giving back the heat it absorbed through the long afternoon with the generosity of things that stored more than they need for themselves. The surface temperature has dropped perhaps 2 degrees from its afternoon high, which is a change too small to notice consciously, but large enough to be registered somewhere below consciousness as a slightly different quality of warmth, a warmth that is the warmth of evening rather than the warmth of noon, distinguished by its angle and its depth rather than by its intensity. The bioluminescence around you is quieted from its earlier brightness. The vertical migration is long over, the surface community having settled into a post-feeding stillness, the organisms that were disturbed enough to flash through the earlier hours of the night now resting in their distribution, their chemistry quiet. Occasional flashes still occur, something large moving far below you, a fish at the surface disturbing the water with its tail, a small wave that tips a concentration of plankton and triggers a brief response. But the continuous ambient glow of the earlier night has subsided to something dimmer, more intermittent, like the last embers of a fire rather than the active fire itself. You have not thought about anything in particular for a long time, or rather you have had thoughts in the way that a calm surface has ripples. They appear and dissipate without building into anything, without accumulating into concern or plan or intention. A thought about the Mosasaur below, a thought about the chalk forming on the floor, a thought that is really not a thought at all, but just a wordless awareness of the night around you, of the scale of the sky, of the particular quality of being small in something large that has no malice toward you and no awareness of your smallness. The sky is extraordinary at this hour, the stars at their fullest, the atmosphere fully dark, the planet between you and the sun at the precise angle that makes the night as complete as it gets, which in the tropics of the Cretaceous, where the nights are long but not polar long, means approximately 9 hours of darkness from the last of the evening sky to the first of the dawn sky. You are in the deepest part of those 9 hours. You are in the middle of the dark, surrounded by light, held by warmth, breathing slowly, going nowhere. Let the thought go. Let the last thought go. Let whatever remains of the day's mind relax its last grip and release into the same state the body has been in for hours, held, warm, floating, requiring nothing. The sea is patient, the night is patient, the chalk is patient. 80 million years is a long patience, and the sea has it, and the sea is under you, and the patience is physical, is structural, is the water itself pressing against you with a pressure that is exactly equal to your weight, and therefore a pressure you do not feel as pressure at all, but as weightlessness, as the closest thing available to the absence of gravity, as rest. Something changes in the quality of the darkness. Not light, not yet, but a lightening, which is a different thing, a reduction in the density of the dark rather than an addition of brightness, a thinning of the night the way fog thins before it clears, still present, still unambiguously night, but with a quality that was not there an hour ago, a quality that suggests potential rather than realizing it. The East, if you orient yourself with the current and the faint memory of where the deepening was first visible last evening, the East has a quality to it that might be imagination and might be genuine, a very faint, very subtle blue that is not yet blue but is the precursor of blue, the possibility of blue, the place in the spectrum where blue will be when the time comes. The stars in that direction have dimmed slightly. Not because they are changing, they have not changed in any measurable way since you first saw them, but because the light against which they are visible is very gradually, very incrementally, brightening. The sky is diluting. Each star in the eastern sky is standing against a background that is fractionally more grey, fractionally less black, than it was an hour before, and the cumulative effect of many such fractions is that the densest part of the Milky Way in that direction is beginning to resolve into individual stars rather than a band of merged light. The edge of the galaxy is becoming visible against the edge of the dawn. The sea below you feels this first. The surface of the sea is a mirror of the sky, and the sky to the east is lightening, and so the surface of the sea to the east is lightening, and from your position you can see it. Not a dramatic lightening, nothing so committed as a colour, just a quality of the darkness in that direction, that is 1 shade removed from the darkness directly overhead, and 2 shades removed from the darkness to the west, where the night still holds completely, unaware of what is coming. The animals of the night are withdrawing. You cannot see this directly, but you feel it in the quality of the water, the texture of the sea changing as the nocturnal community that has been feeding at the surface begins its downward migration. The reversal of the process that brought them up in the evening, the same logic applied in the opposite direction, the surface becoming less safe as it becomes more visible, the zooplankton descending to the layers where the light will not quite reach them through the day, the small fish following, the larger fish following those, the whole vertical succession retreating downward through the water column in the hour before dawn like a stage being cleared before the next performance. The diurnal community is not yet up. There is a gap, brief, slight but perceptible, between the withdrawal of the night community and the appearance of the day community, a transition of perhaps 20 minutes when the surface layer is quieter than it is at any other time of day or night, cleared of the night grazers and not yet filled with the day grazers, the water in a state of holding rather than acting. You are in that gap now. The surface around you is almost perfectly still, the post-rain calm of the earlier night sustained into this pre-dawn quiet. The water a dark mirror that reflects the lightening sky with the fidelity of something that has no other purpose. Your reflection, if there were enough light for it, would be below you in the mirror of the sea looking upward at you through the water, but there is not enough light for it yet, and so you are alone on the surface, unmirrored, singular, floating in the gap between the night's community and the day's community, held by the sea in its most private hour. The light is coming now! Not with speed. The dawn over the open sea is one of the slowest events visible to the human eye, a process that takes the better part of an hour from first perceptible lightening to full sunrise, and each minute of that hour brings a change so gradual that you cannot see it happening, only perceive it having happened when you compare the sky of one moment with the memory of the sky a few moments before. The east is grey-blue. The grey-blue is becoming blue-grey. The transition is in both directions simultaneously. The grey is acquiring warmth, the dark is acquiring light, and the two movements together are producing what will eventually be a sky. The first bird calls. Or not a bird, not what you would call a bird, but something with wings, something that roosts at night and moves in the day, some small feathered theropod that has found its perch on a floating log or piece of coastal debris and has woken to the changing quality of the light with the particular sensitivity of an animal whose entire behavioural calendar is regulated by light and whose response to the first indication of dawn is to announce it. The call is thin and high and travels across the water from the direction of the distant shore, reaching you after a few seconds of travel as a faint thread of sound, bird-like enough to feel familiar, different enough to feel ancient. You listen to it until it fades. The sky to the east is definitely light now, a band of pale blue above the horizon, lighter than the sky above it, with the first pink undertones that signal the approach of the sun below the horizon, the atmosphere scattering its light before it has crested the edge of the world. The surface of the sea in that direction has caught the pink and is holding it, a pale rose band across the eastern water that is one of the most beautiful things available to human perception, and has been available to human perception for a few 100,000 years, but was available to the perception of something, the mosasaur, the plesiosaur, whatever sees and responds to light, for much longer. The day is coming. The Cretaceous day, which will be warm and full of life and exactly the same as every other Cretaceous day in this part of the seaway in this period, differing only in the particular details, this fish rather than that fish, this ammonite rather than that one, this rain rather than no rain, while being essentially identical in its structure and its function and its continuation of the long ongoing project of the sea. You breathe in the first of the morning air. It is cool, slightly, the way air is cool just before the sun arrives, the night's residual chill still present in the atmosphere before the day's warmth replaces it. The coolness on your face is pleasant. The warmth in the water beneath you is constant. Between the cool air and the warm water, you're held at exactly the right temperature, exactly the right balance, and the balance is so perfect that it requires nothing of you. The sea glows in the pre-dawn light. The ammonites are drifting somewhere nearby, their shells catching the first pale illumination and holding it. The mosasaur is somewhere in the water below, beginning its day with the same efficiency it brought to its night. The categories of day and night less absolute to it than to the birds. The pteranodons will arrive at the surface thermal in an hour or two, when the warming water creates the updraft they use. Everything is exactly where it should be in the progression of this day, this ordinary, extraordinary Cretaceous day, that is the same as all the days before it, and all the days after it, and is also, completely and without exception, itself. You are here for the beginning of it. You did not need to be here for the beginning of it. Nothing required your presence for the beginning. The day was going to begin with or without an observer. The mosasaur does not observe the dawn. The ammonite does not observe the dawn. The chalk does not observe the dawn. And yet here you are, present for it, floating in the warm sea at the turning of the day, watching the light come in from the east over 80 million years of absence and change and becoming, the light that will illuminate this sea today, the same light that will illuminate the chalk cliffs when they are finally white cliffs standing in the cold grey sea of a later age, the same light that was here at the beginning and will be here at the end, indifferent and beautiful and absolutely consistent. Let your eyes close with the first warmth of it. The day does not need you to watch it. It is already here. It will continue whether you watch or not. The watching is for you, and now even the watching is becoming too much effort, too much of a task, and the most natural thing is simply to let the dawn happen to you rather than to it, to let the light find you rather than searching for it, to float in the warm sea in the first of the morning with your eyes closed and the light warm on your face and everything exactly as it is and as it will be and as, in some essential way, it has always been. The sea holds you. The light comes. The world begins its day 80 million years ago, in the warm water, in the warm air, in the patient continuing of everything that has always been here and will be here long after the names are invented, and the chalk is climbed and the centuries accumulate and collapse and accumulate again. You breathe, the sea breathes, the dawn arrives. The warmth on your face is real now. Not the memory of warmth, not the residual warmth of the night-warmed water, but new warmth arriving from a new direction, from the east, where the sky has lightened from grey to pale gold, the sun not yet at the horizon, but close enough that its light is reaching the upper atmosphere and scattering downward in the pre-sunrise illumination that is one of the longest and most gradual transitions the sky makes. The gold is not orange yet. It is still the cool preliminary gold that precedes the warm orange, that precedes the red, that precedes the white of the actual sunrise. You have time yet. The sea around you is becoming visible again. Not in the way it was visible during the day, the full colour and clarity of tropical water under a high sun, but in the way things become visible in the first light, which is a grayscale visibility at first, the colours absent, the shapes present, the textures readable as differences in tone rather than as differences in hue. The surface of the sea in this light is pewter and silver, the swells catching the east light on their faces and showing their shapes in a way the flat noon light never reveals. You have been floating for a very long time. Long enough that the question of how long you have been floating has stopped being a question, has become simply a condition of existence, the way being in water is a condition rather than a state with a duration. The water was always there. The water will always be here. The duration of your presence in it is irrelevant to the water, which does not measure time in the way that requires duration to be significant. The morning birds, the things that function as birds here, the small feathered theropods of the coastal margin, have been calling for some minutes from the direction of the shore. Their calls come and go across the water, some close, some far, some answering others in the way that animals communicate territorial presence and mate availability in the minutes before full dawn when such communication has the most biological value. The calls are ancient in the sense that calling is ancient, that the use of sound to communicate across distance preceded any living thing you have ever known, that the calls of animals at dawn are one of the oldest continuous practices of life on Earth, and what you are hearing now is an early chapter of that practice, the same chapter that all later dawn choruses continue in their different registers. The light strengthens, the east is pink now, and the pink is acquiring orange at the horizon, and the orange will become red, and the red will become the white gold disk of the sun clearing the horizon in another few minutes. You do not need to be awake for this. The sunrise will happen whether you watch it or not. The sun has been rising over this sea for the entire duration of the seaway, and it has not needed an observer for any of its previous risings, and it does not need one now. Let your eyes be heavy. The dawn is a permission to rest, the night completed, the vigil kept, the dark hours passed through. You have been present for the whole of the Cretaceous night, and the night is ending, and the ending is a completion, the kind of completion that makes rest possible, that gives the rest its quality of having been earned, though you did not earn it by doing anything, only by being here, only by staying and breathing and floating and watching the bioluminescence and the stars and the rain and the passing of the deep hours. The sea accepts the dawn the same way it accepted the dusk, with no change in its fundamental character. The water is the same water it was in the dark. The warmth is the same warmth. The salt content has not changed. The depth below you has not changed. The only thing that has changed is the quality of the light, and light for the sea is a surface phenomenon. It touches the uppermost layers and converts there from photons to chemistry and life. And below, the euphotic zone, the sea continues in permanent dark regardless of what the sky is doing. The dawn is for the surface. You are at the surface. The dawn finds you exactly where you are. That is enough. That is, in the precise sense of the word, sufficient, containing all that is needed, nothing lacking, nothing in excess. The dawn finds you in the warm water, in the warm air, with the last of the night behind you, and the whole of the new day in front of you. And none of that day requires anything from you right now. Not a single thing. And in the absence of all requirement, there is only this: the light coming, the water holding, the breath moving in and out, the world being exactly what it is. Thank you so much for watching. If you would like to see more videos like this, please consider leaving a like and subscribing to the channel, as it really helps us continue making more content. Anyways, see you in the next one. The sea is very still now. You are still with it. Your breathing has become the breathing of the sea, slow, rhythmic, each inhalation a gentle rise, each exhalation a gentle settling, the two movements perfectly matched to the rhythm of the swell that has been rocking you since you arrived in this warm ancient water. You're not aware of the rhythm as a separate thing anymore. It is simply what your body does. It is simply what being feels like. The water is warm. The water has always been warm. Warm in the way of things that have been warm so long that warmth is not a sensation anymore, but simply the nature of the medium, the baseline against which all other temperatures are measured and found insufficient. You could not be cold here. The word cold does not have a referent here. There is only the warmth of the Cretaceous sea carrying you through the hours of the morning, the light growing slowly in the east, not demanding anything of you, not requiring that you open your eyes or take account of it or respond to it in any way. The ammonites drift somewhere in the water around you. You do not need to see them. You know they are there the way you know the stars are there behind the blue of the day sky, present, patient, continuing their ancient drift through a world that has no name for them yet, and will get along very well when they are gone. They are there. Everything is there. Everything is here. Your body is very heavy in a way that is not uncomfortable. The heaviness of a body that has released all the tensions it did not know it was holding, the small chronic grips in the shoulders, the slight pull behind the eyes, the readiness in the jaw that is always there in waking life and only lets go in sleep. All of it is gone. The water has taken it. The water holds you in the absence of it, in the lightness that the absence produces, a lightness that paradoxically feels like weight, like the weight of being completely at rest. The Mosasaur moves somewhere far below you, in the deep water going about its morning. You do not need to think about the Mosasaur. The Mosasaur is fine. Everything in this sea is fine in the way that everything was fine before the concept of not fine was available, which is a very long time, which is most of the time there has ever been. Breathe in. The air is warm and salt and slightly humid. The way morning air over the open sea is always slightly humid, the water and the air exchanging their moisture in the first light of the day. Breathe out. Let the exhalation be complete. Let it go all the way to the bottom of the breath before the next one begins. Let the pause between exhale and inhale be exactly as long as it needs to be, which is longer than you usually allow. Longer than that. The pause. And then the breath comes, as it always comes, without effort, without invitation, simply because your body knows what it needs and takes it from the warm Cretaceous air, and the taking is effortless, and the receiving is complete, and the exhalation follows, and the pause follows, and the next breath follows, and each breath is the whole world for the duration of the breath. The sea does not know you are here. The sea has not known anyone for longer than anyone has existed, and in that not knowing, in that complete and total absence of record and expectation and recognition, there is the deepest rest available to a consciousness that has spent its entire existence being known, being tracked, being responded to, being accounted for. Here, in the Cretaceous sea 80 million years before your name, you are simply one more warm body in warm water, and the sea holds you the same way it holds the ammonite, the same way it holds the dissolved shells of 1 trillion dead plankton, the same way it holds its own depth, completely, without effort, without end. Let the water have all of you now. Let the last of the not resting go. There is nothing here that needs you to be awake for it. The dawn will happen whether your eyes are open or closed. The mosasaur will make its hunting rounds whether you are watching or not. The chalk will continue its accumulation, grain by grain, cell by cell, the eternal slow building of the record of this moment, this sea, this warm early morning. All of it continues. All of it has always continued. All of it will continue long after the 80 million years are gone, and the sea is gone, and the chalk is white cliffs, and the white cliffs are sand again, and the sand is in a sea again. A new sea, a future sea, the same sea, the one ocean that has been one ocean since the first ocean, and will be one ocean until the last. You are a very small part of a very large continuity. And that is the most restful thing there is. The sea holds you. The sea has always been here. The sea will always be here. Let yourself be very small and very warm and very still in the enormous ancient warmth of it, and let the day begin without you, and let the night come again without you, and let everything that needs to happen without your help or your witness, and let yourself simply be here in the dark, warm water, floating, carried, held. Sleep now. The sea is breathing. You are breathing. There is no difference between the two. Sleep. If you liked this video, let me know where in the world you're watching from and what time it is. I'm always curious about that. And if you have a suggested topic, feel free to leave it in the comments. The sea will be here when you return. Not this sea, not the Western Interior Seaway with its chalk-forming plankton and its mosasaurs and its pteranodons spiralling in the thermal over the warm surface. That sea will be gone by the time you return to it, gone in the way that all things go in geological time, which is completely and without exception, and with no remainder except the chemical record in the rock. But the sea will be here in the sense that seas are always here, that the planet keeps its water and distributes it across its surface in basins that shift and reform and drain and fill, and there is always, somewhere on the surface of the earth, a sea that is warm and shallow and full of life doing what life does, which is the same thing it was doing in the Cretaceous. The warmth you felt in the water tonight is a real warmth in the sense that all warmth is real. It was thermal energy. It was molecules moving at a rate that your skin registers as warmth. It was physics. That physics is available to you in your own world, in your own sea, in the bath, in the warm water that you carry with you through the life you're living in the time you inhabit. The water is always warm if you let it be. The warmth is always available. The Cretaceous taught you nothing new about warmth. It only gave you the warmth in its purest form without context, without the other things that usually come with warmth, so that warmth was all there was, and all there was enough. You breathe. Your breathing has changed through the hours in this water, has slowed and deepened and settled into the rhythm of a body that has finished its processing for the night, that has handed over to the simpler systems, the ones that do not need your supervision or your participation. Those systems are running. They are reliable. They have been running since before you had any way of knowing they were running, and they will run without your knowledge or attention for as long as they run, which is all the time you are alive, which is a long time, which is the gift. The Cretaceous Sea is behind you now, or will be, or is becoming so as the drift of your attention moves back through the water toward the surface of the present, but behind you in a direction that is not temporal, not in the direction of the past, which is where the Cretaceous actually is, but in the direction of deeper, in the direction of underneath, in the direction of the substrate on which the present rests. The chalk is under your present sea. The chalk is under the cliffs. The chalk is under the fields of England and France, and the great plains of the continent where the sea once was. The Cretaceous is the foundation. You have been to the foundation. That is where you came from, and that is where you are going back to, and the going back is not loss, but completion. Sleep deeply. The foundation holds. The water that was the Cretaceous Sea is still water, still in the world, still running through the hydrological cycle, still in the rain that falls on your roof, still in the sea outside your nearest coast, still in the clouds that are building right now over whatever ocean is building them in your part of the world. The water is continuous. The water has always been continuous. You drank a little Cretaceous sea tonight, in the metaphorical sense that all water on Earth has been all water on Earth at one point or another, and the water in you is the same old water, and the old water holds its memory, and the memory is warm and held, and the night is long, and the sea is patient, and rest is available. The Mosasaur that passed below you in the afternoon is somewhere in the deep water now, its enormous body continuing its patient circuit of the seaway in the dark, its metabolism slower in the cooler night water, its hunting rhythm adjusted to the behaviour of the night community rather than the day. It does not know you are here. It would not have cared if it had known. It is entirely absorbed in its own existence, which is as full and as complete as any existence can be, which requires no witness and no witness's understanding to be fully real. The Mosasaur's life is its own. You watched it from the surface, and the watching changed nothing in the Mosasaur's life, and something small in yours, and that asymmetry is fine, is correct, is the right relationship between a visitor and the world it visits. The ammonites are drifting somewhere in the dark water, their shells catching no light now because there is no light except the bioluminescence, and the bioluminescence finds the shell and slides off it, without catching, without illuminating, just touching and moving on. They drift. They have always drifted. They will drift for 80 million more years before they drift their last. Tonight is one night in that drifting. Tonight is a Tuesday in the ammonite's geological calendar, unremarkable, undistinguished from any other night by any feature that the ammonite could perceive if it could perceive such things, which it cannot. Sleep. The Cretaceous is behind you and you are in your own warm dark and your own comfortable resting place, and the water that was the Western Interior Seaway is in the world still, cycling through the hydrosphere, falling as rain somewhere tonight, filling some river, resting in some aquifer, moving through some living thing. The water is never lost. The water is here. You are here. The night is patient and deep and exactly the right length for all the sleep it can hold. Take all of it,